A tarnished silver locket, locked tight since 1892, falls into Miss Marple's hands, whispering secrets of a vanished heiress and a burned estate. Why won't it open? Who's the shadowy stranger stalking St. Mary Mead, desperate to claim it? As clues unravel hidden letters, a coded photograph, a lost fortune, Miss Marple's sharp mind races against a dangerous foe. Can she unlock the truth before the past's dark secrets strike again? One thing's certain, in St. Mary Mead, even a locket can hide a deadly mystery. Chapter 1. The Lockets Whisper Thee. Late afternoon sun spilled through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage in St. Mary Mead, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak table where a teapot steamed gently. The air carried the faint scent of lavender from the garden, mingling with the comforting aroma of freshly baked scones. Miss Marple, her silver hair neatly pinned, sat in her favorite armchair, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she worked on a pale blue shawl. The village was quiet today, save for the distant chime of the church bell marking 4 o'clock, but Miss Marple's mind was anything but idle. Her sharp eyes, undimmed by age, flickered with the quiet alertness of someone who saw more than most. The soft creak of the garden gate broke her reverie. She glanced up, setting her knitting aside, as a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Lucy Islesborough, her young friend and occasional confidant, stood there, her chestnut curls slightly disheveled from the autumn breeze. Lucy, ever practical, in her tweed skirt and sensible shoes, carried a small parcel wrapped in brown paper, her expression a mix of excitement and hesitation. "Miss Marple, I hope I'm not interrupting," Lucy said, her voice bright but tinged with curiosity. "I've found something peculiar, and I thought you'd be the best person to show it to." Miss Marple's lips curved into a gentle smile. "My dear Lucy, you're never an interruption. Come in, sit down, and let's have some tea. What's this peculiar something you've brought?" Lucy crossed the room, her boots tapping lightly on the polished floorboards, and settled into the chintz-covered chair opposite Miss Marple. She unwrapped the parcel with care, revealing a small, tarnished silver locket, its surface etched with an intricate crest. The locket was no larger than a walnut, its edges worn smooth by time, but it gleamed faintly in the sunlight, as if reluctant to fade into obscurity. A faint inscription, barely legible, curled along its rim to E, 1892. "I found it in an old trunk at Rutherford Hall," Lucy explained, her fingers brushing the locket's surface. "The Cedars, you know, the old wing they're clearing out for renovations." The trunk was tucked away in a corner, covered in cobwebs, practically falling apart. This was inside, wrapped in a scrap of velvet. "It won't open, though I tried everything short of breaking it." Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the locket. She took it gently from Lucy's hands, turning it over with the care one might give a fragile bird's egg. The crest was unfamiliar, a stylized combination of a lion and a rose, but it stirred a memory distant and elusive of village gossip from decades past. The inscription, to E, 1892, suggested a story, perhaps one of love or loss, and Miss Marple's mind began to weave possibilities. "Rutherford Hall, you say?" she murmured, her voice soft but laced with interest. "The Ashford family's old estate, wasn't it? Before the fire, of course." Lucy nodded, pouring herself a cup of tea. "Exactly." The trunk had some papers, too, but they were mostly rotted bills of sale, a few letters, nothing clear. The locket was the only thing intact. I thought it might be valuable, or at least important. There's something about it, don't you think? Like it's hiding a secret. Miss Marple's smile deepened. Lucy, for all her practicality, had a knack for sensing the extraordinary in the ordinary, much like herself. Oh, it's hiding. Something I dare say, she said, her tone light but her mind already turning over the possibilities. A locket like this, locked tight and tucked away, usually has a story to tell. The question is, whose story? She set the locket on the table, its silver catching the light like a winking eye. The crest nagged at her memory, but she couldn't place it, not yet. The Ashfords had been prominent in St. Mary Mead once. Their grand estate, the talk of the village until the fire in 1893 reduced it to ashes. The family had vanished soon after, leaving behind rumors of debt, scandal, and a missing heiress. Could this locket belong to that lost chapter of village history? "Lucy, my dear," Miss Marple said, her voice taking on a conspiratorial edge, "tell me more about this trunk. Was there anything else inside?" "Anything at all?" Lucy frowned, stirring her tea absently. "Not much, I'm afraid. The papers were so brittle they crumbled when I touched them. There was a scrap of lace, though, and a broken fountain pen. Oh, and a button brass with a tiny anchor etched on it. I left them in the trunk thinking they weren't important. Should I go back for them?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "A button, you say? With an anchor? That's curious. Yes, I think you should retrieve them, if you can. Even the smallest things can tell a tale. And this locket?" She tapped it gently with a fingertip. "This locket is positively whispering for attention." Lucy laughed, her earlier hesitation replaced by enthusiasm. "You make it sound alive. I'll go back to Rutherford Hall tomorrow and see what else I can find. But what do you think it is, Miss Marple? A love token? A family heirloom?" "Perhaps both," Miss Marple replied, her gaze drifting to the window, where the garden lay bathed in the golden glow of late afternoon. "Or perhaps something more. The Ashfords were a proud family, but pride often hides secrets. And secrets, my dear, have a way of locking themselves away sometimes in silver." The conversation shifted to lighter matters, village gossip. The upcoming church fete and Lucy's latest adventures at Rutherford Hall. But Miss Marple's thoughts remained on the locket. After Lucy left, promising to return with any new finds, Miss Marple sat alone, her knitting untouched. She picked up the locket again, turning it over in her hands. The crest, she was certain now, belonged to the Ashfords. She recalled a faded painting in the village hall, a portrait of old Sir Reginald Ashford, with a similar lion and rose emblem on his coat. But the inscription, "To E," suggested a personal connection, someone close to the family, perhaps the missing heiress herself. The clock struck 5, and Miss Marple rose, her movements slow but deliberate. She placed the locket in a small velvet pouch and tucked it into her writing desk, locking the drawer with a tiny key she wore on a chain around her neck. The village was peaceful, but Miss Marple knew better than most that peace often cloaked intrigue. She resolved to visit the village archives the next morning, where Mr. Pye, the librarian, might help her uncover more about the Ashfords. For now, though, she returned to her knitting, the soft click of her needles a counterpoint to the questions swirling in her mind. The evening passed quietly, with only the occasional hoot of an owl breaking the silence. Miss Marple sipped her cocoa, her thoughts drifting to the locket's stubborn clasp. It wouldn't yield easily, but neither would she. A secret trapped in silver was no match for her patience. As she climbed the stairs to bed, the locket's whisper lingered in her mind, promising a mystery worth unraveling. The next morning St. Mary Mead woke to a crisp autumn day, the air sharp with the scent of fallen leaves. Miss Marple, dressed in her usual tweed skirt and cardigan, walked briskly to the village hall, where the archives were housed in a small, cluttered room. Mr. Pye, a wiry man with a penchant for bow ties and an encyclopedic knowledge of local history, greeted her. With a flourish, Miss Marple. "A pleasure, as always," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "What brings you to my dusty domain today? Another of your little inquiries?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling. "You know me too well, Mr. Pye. I'm curious about the Ashford family, the ones who owned Rutherford Hall before the fire. Do you have anything on them? Old records, perhaps, or family papers?" Mr. Pye's face lit up, as it always did when given a chance to delve into his beloved archives. The Ashfords, oh my! A tragic lot, weren't they? Let me see. He bustled to a shelf, pulling down a leather-bound ledger with yellowed pages. "This is the estate registry from the 1890s. The Ashfords were mentioned often land disputes, mostly in some rather juicy gossip about their daughter, Eleanor." "Eleanor?" Miss Marple's interest sharpened. The E on the locket seemed to pulse in her memory. "Oh, yes," Mr. Pye said, flipping pages with care. "Eleanor Ashford, the only child of Sir Reginald and Lady Margaret. A beauty, by all accounts, but headstrong. There were rumors she ran off with someone unsuitable, a clerk, or perhaps a sailor. The family never recovered after the fire, and Eleanor, well, she vanished. Some say she died abroad, others that she started a new life. The truth's lost to time, I'm afraid." Miss Marple leaned over the ledger, her eyes scanning the faded ink. A brief entry caught her attention. "Eleanor Ashford, betrothed to Lord Compton, 1891. Engagement dissolved, reasons undisclosed." She made a mental note of the name Compton, another thread to tug. "And the fire?" she asked. "Was there ever a cause determined?" Mr. Pye shook his head. "Arson, some whispered, but it was ruled accidental. The Ashfords were in debt. You see too many balls, not enough tenants paying rent. The fire conveniently erased their troubles, though it left them with nothing. This ledger mentions a family crest, though a lion and a rose, quite distinctive." Miss Marple's heart quickened. The locket's crest matched perfectly. "May I borrow this ledger, Mr. Pye, just for a day or two?" Of course," he said, waving a hand. "But do be careful. It's terribly fragile." She thanked him and left the archives, the ledger tucked under her arm. The village square bustled with morning activity, Mrs. Bantry haggling over apples, children chasing a stray dog, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. The locket, Eleanor Ashford, a broken engagement, a fire. The pieces were scattered, but they were beginning to form a picture. Back at her cottage, she spread the ledger on her table, the locket beside it. The crest was unmistakable now, and the inscription, 2E, 1892, pointed to Eleanor. But why was the locket hidden in a trunk at Rutherford Hall? And why wouldn't it open? Miss Marple fetched her magnifying glass, examining the clasp more closely. It wasn't merely stuck. It seemed designed to resist, as if protecting something precious or dangerous. A knock at the door startled her. It was Lucy, her face flushed from a morning at Rutherford Hall. "I went back to the trunk," she said, breathless, "and found something else. Look." She held out a small brass button, its anchor etching glinting in the light. It was caught in the lining of the trunk, and there was this, too, a scrap of paper with a single word, "Vain." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Vain," she repeated softly. The name was unfamiliar, but it carried weight, like a key turning in a lock. "Well done, Lucy. This button and that name, they're part of the story, I'm sure of it. We'll need to be careful, though. Secrets like these tend to attract attention." Lucy's eyes widened. "You think someone else knows about the locket?" "I think," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but firm, "that anything hidden for so long is bound to have someone looking for it. Now let's have some tea and see what else we can uncover." As Lucy filled the kettle, Miss Marple's gaze returned to the locket. Its silver surface seemed to hum with secrets, whispering of Eleanor Ashford, a lost love, and perhaps a betrayal. She would visit the church hall next, where old parish records might shed light on the mysterious vein. For now she was content to let the mystery unfold slowly, like a skein of wool unwinding in her hands. The locket's whisper had been heard, and Miss Marple was listening. Chapter 2. Shadows in the archives. The morning air in St. Mary Mead carried a crisp bite, the kind that made one's breath curl in faint wisps. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in her soft woolen shawl, stepped out of her cottage, her eyes bright with purpose. The locket Lucy Islesborough had brought her the previous day lay tucked in her handbag, its tarnished silver surface cool against her fingers. The faint inscription, "To E, 1892, and the Ashford family crest had stirred something in her, a prickle of curiosity that refused to be ignored. The village archives housed in the old rectory promised answers, or at least the first. Threads of a tapestry she was eager to unravel. The walk to the archives was short, but Miss Marple took her time, her sensible shoes tapping lightly on the cobblestone path. She passed the bakery, where the scent of fresh scones wafted out, and nodded to Mrs. Bantry, who was fussing over a basket of roses outside her gate. "Off to solve another mystery, Jane?" Mrs. Bantry called, her voice teasing, but warmed-up Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. "Just a bit of history, Dolly. Nothing more." But her mind was already elsewhere, sifting through the fragments of the Locket story. The Ashford family had been gentry, their estate a grand affair, until its sudden ruin. What had happened to them? And why did this locket, so small and unassuming, feel like a key to something larger? The old rectory loomed ahead, its ivy-clad walls sagging under the weight of years. The archives were a treasure trove of St. Mary Mead's past, though few ventured there save for genealogists or the occasional curious soul. Miss Marple pushed open the heavy oak door, its hinges creaking in protest, and stepped into the musty dimness within. The air smelled of aged paper and wax polish, a scent that always set her heart aflutter. Here secrets lay dormant, waiting for someone with the patience to coax them out. Miss Marple. A rare pleasure. Mr. Pye, the librarian, appeared from behind a cluttered desk. his wiry frame swathed in a cardigan that seemed to have at least one button missing. His eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, gleamed with delight. Mr. Pye was an odd duck, as the villagers often said, with a memory for obscure facts and a passion for the archives that bordered on obsession. "What brings you to my kingdom of dust and all?" "A small matter, Mr. Pye," Miss Marple said, her tone light but her gaze sharp. "I'm curious about the Ashford family. They lived here once, didn't they, at Ashford Hall?" Mr. Pye's eyebrows shot up, and he clapped his hands together, sending a puff of dust into the air. "Oh, the Ashfords. A tragic tale, that one. Come, come, let's see what we can unearth." He scuttled toward a row of shelves, his fingers dancing over leather-bound volumes, as if playing an invisible piano. Miss Marple followed, her handbag clasped firmly, the Locket's weight a quiet reminder of her mission. The archives were a labyrinth of narrow aisles, each lined with shelves, groaning under the weight of ledgers, parish registers, and crumbling newspapers. Sunlight filtered through high, grimy windows, casting long shadows that seemed to shift when one wasn't looking. Mr. Pye pulled down a heavy tome labeled St. Mary Mead Land Records, 1880 to 1900, and set it on a reading table with a thud. "Ashford Hall was a fine estate," he said, flipping pages with practiced ease. "Until the fire of '93, of course, burned to the ground and the family scattered like leaves." Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes scanning the faded ink. "A fire? How dreadful! Was it an accident?" Mr. Pye shrugged, his expression turning sly. "That's what the papers said. But village gossip, oh, it told a different story. Arson, some whispered. Others said it was cursed, that the Ashfords had meddled in things best left alone." He lowered his voice as if the walls might overhear. "And then there was the heiress, Eleanor Ashford. Vanished without a trace after the fire. Some say she ran off with a lover. Others say she perished in the flames." "Eleanor," Miss Marple murmured, her fingers brushing the locket through her handbag. "To 1892. Could this Eleanor be the locket's owner?" She glanced at Mr. Pye, who was watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Is there anything more about her? Letters, perhaps, or diaries?" Mr. Pye hesitated, his fingers twitching as if caught in a lie. "Well, there might be something in the Ashford papers. They're in the back, not properly catalogued yet. A bit of a mess, I'm afraid." He gestured toward a shadowy corner of the room where boxes were stacked haphazardly, their contents spilling out like secrets too long confined. Miss Marple smiled, her tone as gentle as ever. "I don't mind a bit of mess, Mr. Pye. Shall we have a look?" He led her to the corner, muttering about damp rot and mice, but Miss Marple sensed a reluctance in his steps. The Ashford papers were a chaotic jumbled letters tied with fraying, ribbon deeds yellowed at the edges, and photographs so faded they seemed to hold ghosts rather than faces. She began sorting through them with care, her gloved hands moving with the precision of a surgeon. Mr. Pye hovered nearby, offering occasional comments but seeming distracted, his eyes darting to the door. One letter caught her attention. Its envelope addressed to Miss Eleanor Ashford, Ashford Hall. The wax seal was broken, but the crest matched the locket's engraving. Miss Marple unfolded it carefully, her heart quickening. The handwriting was elegant, almost desperate. "My dearest E., the heart you wear holds more than my love. Keep it close, for it guards our secret. Should the world turn against us, it will guide you to safety. Yours forever, T. as Silver Heart, Miss Marple whispered, her mind racing. The locket, then, was more than a trinket. It was a safeguard, perhaps even a map. But to what? She tucked the letter into her handbag, intending to study it later, and continued her search. The hours slipped by, marked only by the rustle of paper and Mr. Pye's occasional coughs. Then, without warning, the lights flickered and died, plunging the archives into darkness. Miss Marple froze, her hand on the ledger, as the silence grew heavy, broken only by the faint creak of floorboards. "Mr. Pye?" she called, her voice steady despite the sudden chill in her bones. "Here, Miss Marple." His voice came from across the room, tinged with panic. "The blasted fuse must have gone again. Stay where you are. I'll fetch a torch." But Miss Marple was not one to stay put. She reached into her handbag, her fingers finding the small torch she always carried, a habit born of too many mysteries in too many shadowed places. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing shelves that seemed to loom closer, their contents whispering of forgotten lives. She moved toward the table where she'd left the ledger, her torch sweeping the floor, and then she saw a footprint in the dust, fresh and distinct, leading toward a narrow alcove she hadn't noticed before. It was too large to be Mr. Pye's, and the archives had been empty when she arrived. Her pulse quickened, but her mind remained clear. Someone else was here or had been, and they hadn't wanted to be seen. The alcove was barely wide enough for her to squeeze through, its walls lined with shelves so old they sagged under their own weight. At the far end, her torch illuminated a small, locked cabinet, its brass fittings tarnished but intact. A faint scratch mark near the lock suggested someone had tried to force it open, and recently. Miss Marple knelt, ignoring the ache in her knees, and examined the floor. More footprints, fainter now, but leading back toward the main room. "Miss Marple?" Mr. Pye's voice was closer now, accompanied by the bobbing light of his own torch. "Are you all right?" "Quite all right, Mr. Pye," she called, slipping out of the alcove with a grace that belied her years. She returned to the table just as he reached her, his face pale and his hands trembling. "I found something interesting before the lights went out," she said, holding up the ledger she'd been reading. "A mention of a mysterious E in the Ashford accounts. Do you know anything about it?" Mr. Pye blinked, his torch wavering. "E? Oh, well, it could be Eleanor, I suppose. Or perhaps a servant. The records are full of initials, you know." He laughed, a nervous sound that echoed oddly in the dark. "Let's get these lights back on, shall we?" Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. The ledger had indeed mentioned an A, but it was the context that intrigued her, a payment made to E. In 1892, marked as for safekeeping. Safekeeping of what? And why had Mr. Pye seemed so flustered by her question? The lights flickered back on, bathing the archives in a harsh, yellow glow. Mr. Pye busied himself with straightening papers, his movements jerky, while Miss Marple gathered her findings, the letter, the ledger, and a photograph of Ashford Hall. Before its ruin, its towers stark against a stormy sky. She thanked Mr. Pye with her usual warmth, but as she stepped back into the daylight, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her back. The village square was bustling now, with children chasing a stray dog, and Mrs. Bantry still fussing over her roses. Miss Marple paused, her gaze sweeping the crowd. A man in a gray coat lingered near the post office, his face half hidden by a scarf. He turned away when he saw her looking, his steps quickening as he vanished down a side street. She made a mental note of his height, his gait, the way his shoulders hunched, as if carrying a burden. Back at her cottage, she spread her findings on the dining table, the locket at their center. The letter's words echoed in her mind, the heart. "You wear holds more than my love." Eleanor Ashford had carried a secret, one worth hiding, perhaps worth dying for. And someone, even now, was searching for it, someone who had left footprints in the dust, who had watched her in the dark. Miss Marple poured herself a cup of tea, her knitting untouched on the armchair. The mystery was deepening, its threads tangling in ways she couldn't yet untangle. But she was patient, and the archives had given her more than she'd expected. Tomorrow she would visit the Blue Boar Inn, where Lucy had seen a stranger asking about old jewelry. For now she sipped her tea, her eyes on the locket, and let the puzzle settle in her mind like a seed taking root. The day had been long, but Miss Marple was far from tired. She lit a small fire in the hearth, its crackle filling the quiet cottage, and opened the ledger again. The entry for E was brief, but it listed a sum £50, a fortune in 1892 paid by one Sir Reginald Ashford, Eleanor's father. The purpose was vague, but the date matched the locket's inscription. She turned to the letter, reading the lines that spoke of a secret, a heart, a promise. The photograph of Ashford Hall stared back at her, its windows like eyes that had seen too much. A soft knock at the door startled her, though she showed no sign of it. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and opened the door to find Lucy Islesborough, her face flushed from the evening chill. "Miss Marple, I hope I'm not disturbing you," Lucy said, stepping inside. "I couldn't stop thinking about that locket. Did you find anything at the archives?" Miss Marple smiled, gesturing to the table. "A few threads, my dear. Sit down, and I'll tell you what I've learned. But first, have you noticed anyone unusual in the village today? Someone who didn't quite belong?" Lucy frowned, her brow creasing. "Now that you mention it, there was a man at the inn this morning. He asked about old families, said he was writing a book. But he seemed, I don't know, nervous, kept looking over his shoulder." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened, though her voice remained gentle. "Did he give a name?" "Clarence, I think. Mr. Clarence. He left in a hurry when I mentioned you'd taken an interest in the locket." The name sent a ripple through Miss Marple's thoughts. Clarence. A common enough name, but it fit the man in the gray coat, the one who had vanished into the side street. She poured Lucy a cup of tea, her mind already weaving the new thread into the pattern. "Thank you, Lucy, you've been most helpful. Now, let's see what we can make of these papers." As the fire burned low, the two women bent over the table, their voices soft but animated. The locket gleamed in the lamplight, its secret still locked within, but Miss Marple felt closer to them now. The archives had been a start, a glimpse into a past that refused to stay buried. And somewhere, in the shadows of St. Mary Mead, someone else was listening, waiting, watching for the moment to claim what they believed was theirs. Chapter 3. The Stranger at the Inn. The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead, wrapping the village in a soft, silvery haze. Miss Jane Marple, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, stepped out of her cottage with a purposeful air. Her mind buzzed with the fragments of the mystery she'd begun to unravel. The tarnished silver locket, its cryptic inscription, to E. 1892, and the Ashford family crest that hinted at a scandal buried in time. Her visit to the archives yesterday had confirmed the Ashfords' tragic history, but it was Lucy Islesborough's casual remark about a stranger at the Blue Boar Inn that now drew her attention. A man asking about old jewelry? It was too precise to be coincidence. The Blue Boar Inn stood at the heart of the village, its ivy-clad walls and mullioned windows exuding a timeless charm. As Miss Marple approached, the inn's sign creaked gently in the breeze, depicting a boar with a mischievous glint in its painted eye. She paused, adjusting her hat, and scanned the square. A milk cart rumbled by, and Mrs. Bantry waved from her garden across the way, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes sought something, or someone less familiar. Inside, the inn was warm and dimly lit, smelling of polished oak and freshly baked bread. The innkeeper, Mrs. Higgs, bustled behind the counter, her round face flushed from tending the fire. "Miss Marple, a rare treat to see you here," she called, wiping her hands on her apron. "Tea, or perhaps a scone, fresh from the oven?" "Tea would be lovely, Mrs. Higgs," Miss Marple replied, settling into a cushioned chair by the window. Her gaze drifted to the room's occupants, a pair of farmers discussing crop yields, a young couple sharing a whispered laugh, and an elderly man dozing by the hearth. "No strangers yet. I hear you've had an interesting guest recently," she added, her tone light but probing dot. Mrs. Higgs set down a steaming teapot and leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, you mean that Mr. Clarence? Queer fellow. He was. Turned up 3 days ago, all nerves and sharp eyes. Kept asking about old trinkets, lockets, brooch, that sort of thing. Said he was a collector, but I've seen collectors, and they don't fidget like he did." Miss Marple poured her tea, her movements deliberate. "Did he say why he was interested in such things?" "Not directly," Mrs. Higgs said, glancing over her shoulder as if Mr. Clarence might materialize. "But he left a note on his table. One night forgot it, I reckon. Something about reclaiming what's owed. Sounded like he was chasing a debt, not a bauble. He's gone now, mind you. Left yesterday morning. Gone?" Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Did he mention where he was headed?" Mrs. Higgs shook her head. "Not a word. But he was in a hurry, bags packed before dawn. Paid his bill in cash London notes, crisp as you please." She hesitated, then added, "He did ask about Rutherford Hall, though. Wanted to know who'd lived there in the old days. I told him about the Krakenthorpes, of course, but he seemed more curious about the families before them." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind racing. Rutherford Hall, where Lucy had found the locket, was tied to the Krakenthorpe family now, but the Ashfords had once held sway nearby. Mr. Clarence's interest in the Hall and in lockets suggested he knew more than he let on. "Did he leave anything else behind?" she asked. Mrs. Higgs brightened. "As it happens, he did. A matchbook dropped under his chair. I kept it, thinking he might come back." She scurried to the counter and returned with a small, glossy matchbook, its cover embossed with a gold crest and the words, "The Diogenes Club, London." Miss Marple turned it over in her gloved hands, noting its pristine condition. A London club, exclusive and discreet. Not the sort of place a common collector would frequent. "Thank you, Mrs. Higgs," Miss Marple said, tucking the matchbook into her handbag. "You've been most helpful." As she finished her tea, a shadow flickered outside the window. She glanced up, catching a glimpse of a man in a dark coat standing across the square, his face half hidden by a felt hat. He seemed to be watching the inn, his posture tense. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her expression remained serene. She paid for her tea, exchanged pleasantries with Mrs. Higgs, and stepped outside. The man was still there, lingering by the post office. He was tall, with a lean frame and a restless energy, his hands thrust deep into his pockets. Miss Marple, with the grace of a seasoned observer, strolled toward the village green, her pace unhurried. She sensed his gaze following her, a prickling awareness that confirmed her suspicions. This was no idle loiterer. She paused by the green, pretending to admire the roses in Mrs. Bantry's garden. The man approached, his steps measured, and stopped a few paces away. "Fine morning, isn't it?" he said, his voice clipped but courteous. Up close he was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 40, with sharp cheekbones and pale eyes that darted too often. "Quite lovely," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. "You're new to St. Mary Mead, I take it?" He hesitated, as if weighing his response. "Just passing through. Name's Clarence. I'm interested in local history." "Oh, how delightful!" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her mind catalogued his unease. "We have a charming archive here. Have you visited it?" "Not yet," he said, too quickly. "I've been asking around about old estates. Rutherford Hall, for one. Heard it's got a rich past." "It does indeed," Miss Marple said, her tone warm but guarded. "Though the Krakenthorpes are the ones to ask about it now. Are you looking for something specific?" His eyes narrowed, a flicker of suspicion crossing his face. "Just curiosities, old jewelry maybe, family heirlooms." He paused, studying her. "You seem to know the village well. Ever come across a silver locket, say, with a crest on it?" Miss Marple's heart skipped, but her expression didn't falter. "A locket? How intriguing. I've seen many trinkets in my time, but nothing quite like that. Why a locket?" He shrugged, but his casualness felt forced. "Sentimental value. Belonged to my family once, or so I'm told." "How fascinating," Miss Marple said, tilting her head. "You must tell me more some time, but I'm afraid I have an appointment. Do enjoy your stay, Mr. Clarence." She turned to leave, but not before noticing the matchbook slip from his pocket as he adjusted his coat. It was identical to the one Mrs. Higgs had given her, confirming her hunch. She walked away, her steps steady, but her mind churned with questions. Who was Mr. Clarence, really? And why was he so desperate to find the locket? Back at her cottage, Miss Marple settled into her armchair, the matchbook in hand. The Diogenes Club was a name she vaguely recalled her nephew, Inspector Raymond West, had mentioned it once, describing it as a haunt for London's elite, where secrets were traded as freely as cigars. She penned a quick letter to Raymond, enclosing the matchbook and asking him to trace its origins. "My dear Raymond," she wrote, "a small puzzle has found me, and this may be a piece of it. Do let me know what you uncover." As she sealed the envelope, a creak from the garden gate caught her ear. She peered through the lace curtains, seeing only the swaying roses in the dusk. but the feeling of being watched lingered sharper now. Mr. Clarence, or whoever he was, hadn't left St. Mary Mead, not yet, and the locket, still hidden in her knitting basket, seemed to pulse with secrets yet to be unlocked. The next day dawned bright, but Miss Marple's thoughts were clouded with the enigma of Mr. Clarence. She decided to visit Lucy Islesborough at Rutherford Hall, hoping to glean more about the locket's discovery. The hall, a sprawling Georgian pile, loomed at the edge of the village, its gardens overgrown but grand. Lucy greeted her at the door, her face alight with curiosity. "Miss Marple, have you found anything about the locket?" "Not quite," Miss Marple said, stepping into the hall's cavernous foyer. "But tell me again, Lucy, about the trunk, where you found it. Every detail, if you please." Lucy led her to the attic, a dusty warren of crates and cobwebs. The trunk, a battered leather affair, stood open, its contents a jumble of old clothes and papers strewn about. "It was tucked in the lining," Lucy said, pointing to a torn seam. "I only noticed it because the silver caught the light. I thought it was just a pretty thing, but then I saw the crest." Miss Marple knelt, her fingers tracing the trunk's worn surface. "And no one else has been up here recently?" "Not that I know of," Lucy said. "The Krakenthorpes rarely. Come up here. It's mostly me, fighting for them." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the attic. A faint scuff mark on the floorboards caught her attention, too fresh to belong to Lucy's light tread. She said nothing, but her suspicions deepened. Someone had been here, searching, perhaps. Even before Lucy found the locket, they returned downstairs and over tea in the drawing-room. Miss Marple shared her encounter with Mr. Clarence. Lucy's eyes widened. "That's him, the man I saw at the inn. He was at the bar asking Mrs. Higgs about old families. I didn't think much of it then, but he did seem off." "Off indeed," Miss Marple murmured. "I wonder what he knows about our locket and what he's willing to do to get it." That afternoon, Miss Marple took a detour through the village, her route leading past the post office. She mailed her letter to Raymond, but as she turned to leave, a figure darted behind the churchyard wall. She didn't pursue. Her knees weren't what they used to be, but she noted the man's dark coat and felt hat. Mr. Clarence was still watching, and his persistence was both intriguing and unsettling. Back home, she sat by her fire, knitting, forgotten as she pieced together the puzzle. The locket, the Ashfords, Mr. Clarence, and now the Diogenes Club. Each was a thread in a tapestry of secrets. She recalled a story from her youth, about a village girl who'd vanished after a forbidden love, her name whispered only in hushed tones. Could Eleanor Ashford be that girl? And was Mr. Clarence a descendant or something more sinister? As night fell, a soft rain pattered against her windows. Miss Marple lit a lamp and opened her notebook, jotting down her thoughts. "Mr. Clarence," she wrote, "is no mere collector. His interest is personal, perhaps tied to a family grudge. The locket holds a key not to wealth, I suspect, but to truth. And truth in St. Mary Mead is rarely simple." She closed the notebook, her eyes drifting to the knitting basket where the locket lay hidden. Tomorrow she would visit the church hall, where the vicar had mentioned old records about the Ashfords. But for now she felt the weight of the mystery settle around her, as tangible as the rain outside. Mr. Clarence was out there, watching, waiting. and Miss Marple, with her quiet resolve, was ready to meet his challenge. The story unfolded over the next few days, each moment layered with subtle clues and quiet tension. Miss Marple's visit to the church hall revealed a parish register from 1892, its pages brittle but intact. A single entry caught her eye, a baptism for an unnamed child, born to E.A. and T.V. The vicar, flustered, admitted he'd never noticed it before. "It's irregular," he said. "No proper names, no witnesses, almost as if it was meant to be forgotten." Miss Marple didn't press him, but her mind raced. Eleanor Ashford and Thomas Vane, perhaps? A child hidden from the world could explain the Locket's significance and Mr. Clarence's obsession. She left the hall with a photocopy of the entry, tucked safely in her handbag. Meanwhile, Mr. Clarence's movements grew bolder. Lucy spotted him near Rutherford Hall, sketching the estate's layout in a notebook. Mrs. Bantry reported a stranger lingering by the archives, and the postmistress mentioned a man mailing a parcel to London, addressed to A. Vane. Miss Marple filed each detail away, her suspicions coalescing around a name: Arthur Vane, a possible descendant of Thomas, chasing a legacy he believed was his. One evening, as Miss Marple walked home from a village meeting, she sensed footsteps behind her. She turned, her torch casting a beam into the fog, but saw only shadows. "Good evening," she called, her voice steady. No answer came, but the footsteps stopped. She continued on, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. The climax came unexpectedly, during a chance encounter at the village shop. Miss Marple, buying tea, found herself face to face with Mr. Clarence. He froze, his hand clutching a newspaper. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice tight, "we seem to keep meeting." "So we do," she replied, her smile serene. "Have you found your locket yet, Mr. Clarence? Or should I say, Mr. Vane?" His face paled, and for a moment she thought he might bolt. But he recovered, forcing a laugh. "You're a sharp one, aren't you? No harm meant, just chasing a family story." "Stories can be dangerous," Miss Marple said softly, "especially when they're true." He left without another word, but his eyes burned with a mix of fear and defiance. Miss Marple watched him go, knowing the game had shifted. She returned home, her mind alight with plans. The Locket's secret was close now, and she would guard it until the truth was ready to emerge. As she sat by her fire that night, the rain heavier now, Miss Marple felt a quiet thrill. The mystery was far from solved, but she had faced Mr. Clarence and held her ground. The Locket, the Ashfords, and the shadowy Vane family were drawing her deeper into a web of love, loss, and revenge. And she, with her unassuming air and razor-sharp mind, was ready to unravel it all. Chapter 4. A glimpse inside the late afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage in St. Mary Mead, casting delicate patterns across the polished oak table. The room was a haven of quiet order, a vase of freshly cut marigolds, a neatly stacked pile of knitting wools, and a porcelain teapot steaming gently beside a pair of cups. Miss Marple sat in her favorite armchair, her posture upright yet relaxed, her keen eyes fixed on the tarnished silver locket that lay before her. Its surface, etched with the Ashford family crest, gleamed faintly under the soft light as if whispering secrets it had guarded for decades. Lucy Islesborough, Her young friend and occasional sleuthing partner, perched on the edge of a chintz-covered chair, her hands clasped with barely contained excitement. "It's like something out of a novel, isn't it, Miss Marple? A locket that won't open, hiding who knows what. Do you think it's a love token? Or perhaps a clue to some dreadful crime?" Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile, her fingers lightly tracing the locket's intricate engravings. "My dear Lucy, lockets are rarely just trinkets. They are vessels for memory, for promises kept or broken. This one, I suspect, holds a story that someone went to great lengths to conceal." Her voice was soft, almost meditative, but there was a spark in her eyes that Lucy knew well a sign that Miss Marple's mind was already weaving threads of suspicion into a pattern only she could see. Lucy leaned forward, her auburn curls catching the sunlight. "Shall we try to open it? I've brought my sewing kit. There's a fine needle that might do the trick. Or perhaps a hairpin. I read somewhere that hairpins are splendid for picking locks." Miss Marple chuckled, a sound as warm as the tea steaming beside her. "Patience, Lucy. Brute force rarely unlocks secrets as delicate as this. But a hairpin, carefully applied, might just persuade this locket to share its tale." She reached into her sewing basket, retrieving a slender silver hairpin with the practiced ease that belied her age. "Now let's see what we're dealing with." The locket was small, no larger than a walnut, its clasp stubbornly sealed by time or design. Miss Marple held it close, her fingers moving with the precision of a watchmaker. She tilted it toward the light, examining the faint inscription, "To E, 1892, and the crest, a lion rampant and twined with ivy, which she had traced to the vanished Ashford family. The clasp was not locked in the conventional sense, but seemed fused, as if sealed by heat or intent. She probed gently with the hairpin, feeling for any give in the mechanism. Lucy watched, barely breathing. "Do you think it's rusted shut? Or perhaps there's a trick to it, like those puzzle boxes my cousin used to collect?" "Possibly," Miss Marple murmured, her focus unwavering. "But I suspect this locket was meant to stay closed until the right person or the right moment came along." Her hairpin found a subtle notch, and with a delicate twist there was a faint click. The locket sprang open, revealing its contents like a flower unfurling after a long winter dot inside lay. A tiny folded photograph, its edges yellowed but intact, and a single lock of auburn hair tied with a thread so fine it was nearly invisible. The photograph was no larger than a postage stamp, yet it held the weight of a revelation. Miss Marple carefully unfolded it, her fingers trembling not with age, but with the thrill of discovery. The image showed a young woman, her face soft yet resolute, standing beside a man whose features were sharp and intense. Their hands were clasped, and their eyes, even in the faded sepia, burned with a shared secret. Lucy gasped, leaning closer. "Who are they? She's beautiful, isn't she? And that hair, it matches the lock inside. Could she be Eleanor Ashford?" Miss Marple nodded slowly, her mind racing. "I believe so. The crest, the inscription, and now this photograph all point to Eleanor. But the man—" She tilted the photograph, catching the light. "He is not of the Ashford family, I think. His attire is modest, not the tailored elegance of gentry. A clerk, perhaps, or a tradesman. Someone her family would not have approved of." Lucy's eyes widened. "A forbidden romance That's why the locket was hidden away. But what are those marks on the edges? They look like writing, but it's so faint. Miss Marple held the photograph closer, her magnifying glass retrieved from a nearby drawer. The edges bore tiny, deliberate ink marks, not random smudges, but a pattern. A code, perhaps, she said, her voice tinged with excitement. Or coordinates. Something meant to be read only by those who knew what to look for. We shall need better light and perhaps a cipher key to make sense of it. Before they could delve further, a sharp knock echoed through the cottage, shattering the quiet. Lucy started, but Miss Marple's expression remained serene, though her eyes flicked to the locket, which she swiftly closed and slipped into her cardigan pocket. "Answer the door, Lucy, but be cautious. We may have stirred something by opening this." Lucy rose, smoothing her skirt, and crossed to the door. She opened it to find the vicar, Reverend Clement, his round face flushed from the brisk walk across the village green. His clerical collar was slightly askew, and his eyes darted nervously. "Miss Marple, I'm so sorry to disturb you," he said, stepping inside at her gesture. "But there's been a most peculiar incident at the church hall. I thought you should know, given your knack for noticing things." Miss Marple motioned for him to sit, pouring a cup of tea with the calm precision of a hostess unruffled by surprises. "Do tell, Reverend. What sort of incident?" The vicar took the cup, his hands trembling slightly. "Someone broke into the hall last night. The lock on the back door was forced, and the record cabinet where we keep the old parish registers was tampered with. Nothing was stolen, as far as I can tell, but papers were disturbed. And, well—" he hesitated, glancing at Lucy. "They were papers about the Ashford family. I remembered you were asking about them at the archives, Miss Marple." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, though her smile remained polite. "How very interesting. And? You say nothing was taken?" "Not that I could see," the vicar replied, sipping his tea. "But it's odd, isn't it? Those records haven't been touched in years. I thought perhaps— Well, with your interest in the Ashfords, you might know why someone would care about them now." Lucy glanced at Miss Marple, her expression a mix of excitement and unease. "It's the locket, isn't it? Someone knows we've found it." Miss Marple's fingers tapped lightly on the arm of her chair, a rhythm that belied the rapid calculations in her mind. "Possibly, Lucy, or someone is searching for what the locket might lead to. Reverend, were there any signs of who might have done this? Footprints, perhaps, or items left behind?" The vicar shook his head. "Nothing obvious, I'm afraid. The floor was swept clean, almost deliberately so. But I did find this near the cabinet." He reached into his pocket and produced a small, crumpled piece of paper. It was a corner torn from a larger sheet, bearing a single word in faded ink. Eleanor Dot. Miss Marple took the paper, her fingers brushing its edges as if it might speak. "Thank you, Reverend. This is most helpful. I think I shall visit the church hall myself tomorrow. Sometimes the smallest details reveal the most." The vicar nodded, looking relieved to have shared his burden. "I knew you'd know what to do, Miss Marple. I'll leave you to your evening. Do be careful, though. St. Mary Mead is usually so peaceful, but this feels different." As Lucy showed him out, Miss Marple sat back, her mind turning over the new pieces of the puzzle. The locket, now warm in her pocket, seemed heavier than before. its contents a bridge to a past that someone was desperate to unearth or bury forever. She glanced at Lucy, who returned with a determined look. "What now, Miss Marple? The church hall? Or do we try to crack that code in the photograph?" Miss Marple rose, moving to the window to draw the curtains against the gathering dusk. "Both, my dear. But first we must be cautious. Someone is watching, and I suspect they are closer than we think. Tomorrow we'll visit the church hall. For now, let's keep the locket safe and see what we can make of those ink marks." The evening settled over St. Mary Mead, the village's quiet charm masking the undercurrent of intrigue that Miss Marple felt as keenly as a draught through an open window. She sat at her writing desk, the locket and photograph before her, and began sketching the ink marks onto a sheet of paper. Each stroke was deliberate, her mind weaving connections between the Ashford family, the mysterious man in the photograph, and the shadowy figure who had rifled through the church halls. Records. Lucy, ever eager, brought a lamp closer. "It's like a treasure map, isn't it? Those marks, they could lead anywhere. What if they point to something hidden on the old Ashford estate?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "You've been reading too many adventure stories, Lucy, but you're not entirely wrong. The Ashfords were wealthy, and wealth often leaves traces, sometimes in the form of secrets locked away. Let's see if we can decipher this before our visitor returns." The night deepened, and the cottage grew quiet save for the soft scratch of Miss Marple's pen and the occasional crackle of the fire. The locket, now open, seemed to pulse with its own life, a relic of love and loss that had drawn Miss Marple into a mystery as intricate as her finest knitting. And as she worked, she felt the familiar thrill of the chase, not for treasure, but for truth, which was always far more valuable. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that made St. Mary Mead feel like a painting come to life. Miss Marple and Lucy set out for the church hall, the locket tucked safely in Miss Marple's handbag. The village was stirring. Mrs. Price at the bakery waved, her apron dusted with flour. Young Tommy Pierce darted past on his bicycle, nearly colliding with a post-box. But Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere, her senses alert for any sign of the watcher she suspected was near. The church hall stood at the edge of the village green, a modest stone building with ivy climbing its walls. The vicar had left the key under a flower pot as promised, and Miss Marple unlocked the door with a steady hand. Inside, the air was cool and musty, the scent of old wood and wax mingling with the faint tang of disturbed dust. The record cabinet stood against the far wall, its doors slightly ajar, as if inviting inspection. Lucy shivered. "It's eerie, isn't it? Knowing someone was here, poking through things in the dark." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the room. Eerie, perhaps, but also revealing. Let's see what they left behind. She moved to the cabinet, her fingers brushing the scuff marks the vicar had mentioned. They were faint, barely visible against the polished floor, but deliberate, a series of small, curved impressions, as if someone had knelt and shifted their weight. "Look here, Lucy," Miss Marple said, pointing. "These aren't random. Someone took their time, perhaps searching for something specific, and they were careful to clean up after themselves except for that torn paper." Lucy crouched beside her, her eyes narrowing. "Do you think it was that man from the inn, Mr. Clarence? He seemed awfully interested in old jewelry." "Possibly. Miss Marple said, her tone thoughtful. "But we mustn't jump to conclusions. People are rarely as straightforward as they seem, and Mr. Clarence, if that's his name, has his own story to tell. For now, let's focus on what they were after." She opened the cabinet, revealing rows of leather-bound registers, their pages yellowed but meticulously organized. The vicar had been right. The Ashford family records were disturbed, some pages creased as if hastily turned. Miss Marple pulled out a register dated 1892, her fingers moving with the care of an archaeologist uncovering a relic. She flipped to the marriage records, her eyes scanning the faded ink. "There," she said, pointing to a line near the bottom. "Eleanor Ashford, married to Thomas Vane, October 1892. A secret marriage, it seems, performed by a visiting curate. No witnesses listed, which is unusual. And here," she turned the page, revealing a jagged edge where a section had been torn away. "This is where our intruder left their mark." The missing page likely held more details about Eleanor and Thomas. Lucy's eyes widened. "A secret marriage, that explains the locket, doesn't it? It must be a love token from Thomas to Eleanor. But why tear the page? To hide the marriage? Or to protect it?" Miss Marple said, closing the register. "The Ashfords were proud, and Eleanor's marriage to a man beneath her station would have been scandalous. Someone, perhaps her family, went to great lengths to erase it. But the locket survived, and so did this record, at least in part." They spent the next hour combing through the cabinet, finding little else of note. But as they prepared to leave, Miss Marple's gaze fell on a small brass plaque near the door, commemorating the hall's restoration in 1893, the year after the Ashford estate fire. "Curious," she murmured. "The timing is no coincidence. The fire, the marriage, the locket, all within a year. We need to know more about Thomas Vane." As they stepped outside, locking the door behind them, a shadow flickered at the edge of the green, a figure half hidden by the yew trees. Lucy gasped, but Miss Marple's hand on her arm was steadying. "Don't look directly, Lucy. Let them think we haven't noticed. But mark my words, someone is very interested in what we're doing." They walked back to the cottage, the village's peaceful facade now tinged with an undercurrent of menace. Miss Marple's mind was alight with possibilities, each clue a thread in a tapestry she was only beginning to unravel. The locket, the photograph, the torn register all pointed to a love story cut short, a secret hidden, and a shadow that lingered still. Back at the cottage, Miss Marple spread the photograph and locket on the table once more, her magnifying glass poised over the ink marks. "We'll need to decode this, Lucy," she said, "but we must also be prepared. Whoever broke into the church hall knows more than we do, and they're watching. Tonight, we lock the doors and keep the locket close. Tomorrow we'll follow the trail of Thomas Vane." As the fire crackled and the village settled into night, Miss Marple felt a familiar thrill, not of fear, but of anticipation. The locket had whispered its first secret, but there were more to come, and she was determined to hear them all. Chapter 5. Echoes in the church hall. The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead, wrapping the village in a soft silver shroud. Miss Jane Marple, her sensible shoes tapping lightly on the path, made her way toward the church hall, her mind as sharp as the autumn air. The locket, now safely tucked in her handbag, seemed to hum with secrets. its tarnished silver surface a silent witness to a century-old scandal. The discovery of the photograph and the lock of auburn hair inside had only deepened the mystery, and the disturbance at the church hall papers about the Ashford family rifled through suggested someone else was chasing the same truth. Miss Marple's eyes, bright and unyielding despite her years, scanned the familiar lanes. The village was waking slowly, with the baker's boy whistling as he pedaled past, and Mrs. Price, the postmistress, sweeping her doorstep. Yet there was a prickle at the back of Miss Marple's neck, a sense of being observed that she couldn't shake. She adjusted her hat, a prim navy affair with a single feather, and quickened her pace. The church hall loomed ahead, its stone facade weathered but proud, the arched windows glinting in the weak morning light. Inside, the hall smelled of old wood and wax polish, with a faint undertone of damp from last night's rain. The vicar, Mr. Clement, was already there, fussing over a stack of hymnals. His round face, usually beaming with genial warmth, was creased with worry. "Miss Marple," he said, looking up, "I'm so glad you've come. This business with the break-in—it's most unsettling. Nothing stolen, mind you, but the mess they left in the record cabinet, all those old parish registers, scattered like leaves." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene but her mind racing. "Most unsettling indeed, Vicar. May I see the cabinet?" Mr. Clement led her to a corner of the hall where a heavy oak cabinet stood, its doors slightly ajar. The lock was scratched, the marks fresh and jagged, as if someone had used a crude tool in haste. Miss Marple's gloved fingers traced the scratches, her lips pursing slightly. "Not a professional job," she murmured. Someone was in a hurry. She knelt, ignoring the faint protest of her knees, and examined the floor. There in the dust were scuff marks, irregular, heavy, as if someone had shuffled nervously while prying open the cabinet. The marks led to a nearby window, its latch loose and the frame smudged with fingerprints. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Whoever did this wasn't expecting to be interrupted," she said, standing and brushing her hands. "Vicar, do you recall which records were disturbed?" Mr. Clement scratched his head, his glasses slipping down his nose. "The older ones, mostly. From the 1890s, I think. I noticed a few pages from the 1892 register were torn. I've put them aside for you." He gestured to a small table where a single page, yellowed and brittle, lay under a paperweight dot. Miss Marple picked up the page with care, her fingers steady despite the fragility of the paper. The ink was faded, but the words were clear enough. A record of a marriage dated August 12, 1892, between Eleanor Ashford and Thomas Vane. The groom was listed as a clerk, his address a modest boarding-house in London. The bride's name carried the weight of the Ashford estate, though a note in the margin, in a different hand, read, "Marriage unacknowledged by family." Miss Marple's breath caught, though her face remained composed. "Eleanor Ashford," she said softly, "and Thomas Vane, a secret marriage hidden from her family's wrath." She looked at the vicar. "Do you recall any stories about Eleanor? The village has a long memory." Mr. Clement hesitated, his eyes darting to the window as if expecting an eavesdropper. "There were whispers, Miss Marple. My predecessor, old Mr. Harrow, used to talk of a scandal in the Ashford family. Eleanor was their only daughter, meant to marry well some lord or other, they said, but she vanished, not long after the fire. At Ashford Hall in '93, some said she ran off with a lover, others that she died in the blaze. Her family never spoke of her again. Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving threads of connection. The locket inscribed to E, 1892, the photograph of a young woman with auburn hair. The secret marriage it all pointed to Eleanor. Ashford and a love her family deemed unacceptable. But why had the locket been hidden in a trunk at Rutherford Hall? And who was desperate enough to break into the church hall to find it? She tucked a torn page into her handbag, next to the locket. "Thank you, Vicar. This is most helpful. I'll take care not to damage it." She paused, her eyes twinkling with a sudden thought. Might I borrow the key to the hall for a closer look later? I'd like to examine the cabinet again in better light. Mr. Clement, ever trusting, handed her the key. "Of course, Miss Marple, but do be careful. Whoever broke in might come back." As she left the hall, the mist had lifted, revealing a sky of pale blue streaked with clouds. The village square bustled quietly, Mrs. Murgatroyd gossiping with the greengrocer, children chasing a stray cat. But Miss Marple's thoughts were elsewhere. She walked toward the Blue Boar Inn, where Lucy Islesborough was waiting, her practical boots and cheerful smile a contrast to the morning's somber mood. "Any luck?" Lucy asked, falling into step beside her. Her blonde hair was pinned neatly, but a stray curl betrayed her restless energy. "A great deal," Miss Marple replied, her voice low. The locket belonged to Eleanor Ashford, who married a man named Thomas Fane in secret. The Ashfords disapproved, and Eleanor disappeared soon after. The break-in last night was no coincidence. Someone is looking for answers, or perhaps for the locket itself. Lucy's eyes widened. "You think it's that man from the inn, Mr. Clarence?" "Possibly," Miss Marple said, her tone measured. "But we mustn't jump to conclusions. Village gossip is like a spider's web, beautiful, but it can trap the unwary." She glanced at Lucy, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Would you care to join me for a little detective work this afternoon? I'd like to revisit the hall, and 2 pairs of eyes are better than 1. Lucy grinned. "I wouldn't miss it. But what are we looking for?" "Something overlooked," Miss Marple said simply. "The truth is often in the smallest details." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the church hall as Miss Marple and Lucy returned, the key turning smoothly in the lock. The hall was silent, save for the creak of the floorboards under their feet. Miss Marple moved straight to the cabinet, her torch sweeping over the shelves. The parish registers, some dating back to the 1700s, were neatly arranged again, thanks to Mr. Clement's efforts. But Miss Marple's attention was on the scuff marks she'd noticed earlier. "Lucy, dear, could you fetch that chair?" she asked, pointing to a wooden seat by the wall. "I'd like to check the top of the cabinet." Lucy dragged the chair over, steadying it as Miss Marple climbed with surprising agility for a woman of her age. From her vantage point, Miss Marple ran her fingers along the cabinet's top, dislodging a faint layer of dust. Her hand stopped at a small metal object, a hairpin, bent and rusted, but unmistakably out of place. "Well now," she said, holding it up to the light, "this isn't something Mr. Clement would leave lying about." Lucy frowned. "A hairpin? Could it belong to the intruder? Or someone trying to pick the lock?" Miss Marple said, slipping the hairpin into her pocket. It's curious, isn't it? The lock was forced, but a hairpin suggests an attempt at finesse first. Our intruder is impatient, but not entirely unskilled. They moved to the window next, where the smudged latch caught Miss Marple's eye again. She examined it closely, noting a faint trace of oil on the frame. "Machine oil," she murmured, sniffing delicately. "Not something you'd find in a church hall, perhaps from a tool or a vehicle." Lucy peered over her shoulder. "You think they came by car? There's that old barn near the lane. People sometimes park there when they don't want to be seen." Miss Marple's eyes lit up. "An excellent thought, Lucy. Shall we take a look?" The barn, a crumbling structure at the edge of the village, was tucked behind a copse of elms. Its doors sagged on rusted hinges, and the air inside was thick, with the scent of hay and mildew. Miss Marple's torch swept the floor, revealing tire tracks in the dirt, fresh and deep. Nearby, a crumpled cigarette packet lay discarded, its brand unfamiliar, something foreign, perhaps from London. "Someone was here recently," Lucy said, picking up the packet with a handkerchief. "This isn't a local brand." Miss Marple nodded, her mind piecing together fragments. The tire tracks, the oil, the cigarette packet, the hairpin. They painted a picture of someone careful but careless in their haste. She thought of Mr. Clarence, the stranger at the inn, and his cryptic note about reclaiming what's owed. Could he be connected to Thomas Vane, or was he after the locket for another reason? As they left the barn, the sun was dipping low, casting the village in a golden glow. But Miss Marple's calm was shattered by a sudden movement, a shadow flitting behind the elms. She froze, her hand tightening on her handbag. "Lucy," she whispered, "don't turn around. We're being watched." Lucy's face paled, but she kept her voice steady. "What do we do?" "We walk," Miss Marple said firmly, "slowly back to the village. And we don't look back." They moved down the lane, Miss Marple's steps deliberate, her senses alert. The shadow didn't follow, but the prickle at her neck remained. Back at her cottage, she locked the door and drew the curtains, her heart beating a little faster than usual. Lucy, ever practical, lit the fire, and they sat with cups of tea, the locket on the table between them. "Someone wants this badly," Lucy said, her voice hushed. "Do you think it's just about the locket or something more?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "The locket is a key, my dear, not just to a secret, but to a story someone once buried or reclaimed. Eleanor and Thomas hid something, and I believe it's tied to the Ashford fortune, but we must be cautious. Our shadow is desperate, and desperation makes people dangerous." That night, as Lucy slept in the spare room, Miss Marple sat by her window, her knitting untouched. The village was quiet, but the darkness outside seemed alive with whispers. She thought of Eleanor Ashford, a young woman who defied her family for love, and Thomas Vane, a clerk who dared to dream beyond his station. The locket was their token, but what else had they left behind? And who was willing to risk so much to claim it? She locked her doors, checked the windows, and settled into her chair, her mind as sharp as ever. The mystery was deepening, but Miss Marple was undeterred. Tomorrow she would follow the trail to London, to the Vane family, and perhaps to the heart of the secret trapped in the locket. The next morning, Miss Marple woke early, her resolve unshaken. She packed a small bag, including the locket and the torn parish register page, and telephoned her nephew, Inspector Raymond West. Raymond, dear, she said, her voice bright but firm, I'll need your help in London. There's a gentleman's club I'd like to visit, and I believe you'll find it most interesting. As she hung up, she glanced at the locket, its silver catching the morning light. The mystery of Eleanor and Thomas was unraveling, but the shadow and the elms lingered in her mind. Whoever was watching her would not stop, not until the locket's secret was theirs or Miss Marple outwitted them first. Chapter 6. The London connection. The train to London rattled alone, its rhythm a steady counterpoint to Miss Jane Marple's thoughts. She sat by the window, her small, neat figure wrapped in a tweed coat, her eyes tracing the patchwork fields of the English countryside as they blurred past. In her lap rested her knitting bag, but her needles lay untouched, her mind too occupied with the locket and its secrets. The tarnished silver heart, now safely tucked in her handbag, seemed to hum with the weight of its history, a history she was determined to unravel. The morning had begun with a crispness that promised autumn, and Miss Marple had boarded the train at St. Mary Mead's modest station with a sense of purpose. Her nephew, Inspector Raymond West, had telephoned the previous evening, his voice crackling with excitement over the matchbook she'd sent him. "It's from the Argyle Club." "Aunt Jane," he'd said. "A gentleman's club in Mayfair, old as the hills and full of secrets. I'll meet you at Paddington tomorrow 10 o'clock sharp." His tone had carried that mix of exasperation and admiration she knew so well, as if he couldn't quite believe his elderly aunt had stumbled into another mystery. Now, as the train swayed, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the man at the Blue Boar Inn, Mr. Clarence, with his nervous eyes and cryptic note about reclaiming what's owed. The matchbook he'd dropped, embossed with the Argyle Club's crest, had been her first solid lead beyond the locket itself. She suspected Clarence was no stranger to the Ashford family's tangled past, and the thought sent a familiar thrill through her. It was not unlike the feeling of spotting a dropped stitch in her knitting, a small error that, once noticed, unraveled a pattern far larger than expected. The train pulled into Paddington with a hiss of steam, and Miss Marple stepped onto the platform, her eyes scanning the bustling crowd. Raymond was easy to spot, his tall frame and sharp suit cutting through the sea of travelers. He waved, his smile warm but tinged with the impatience of youth. "Aunt Jane, you've outdone yourself this time," he said, taking her arm as they navigated the station. "A matchbook from a shady character? It's practically a novel." Miss Marple's lips twitched. "My dear Raymond, life is often more novel like the novels themselves. Now tell me about this Argyle Club." As they settled into a taxi bound for Mayfair, Raymond explained. The Argyle Club was a relic of Victorian grandeur, its membership a mix of old money, new money, and men with secrets to spare. The matchbook suggested Clarence was either a member or had connections there, and Raymond's inquiries had unearthed a name. Arthur Vane, a descendant of Thomas Vane, the clerk tied to Eleanor Ashford's secret marriage. Arthur was an antiques dealer known for dealing in rare artifacts, some of dubious provenance. "He's got a reputation," Raymond said, his voice low. "Not quite a criminal, but close. If your locket's tied to him, it's no small matter." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving threads. Thomas Vane, the lowly clerk who'd loved Eleanor Ashford, had been erased from St. Mary Mead's history after her family's disapproval. Could Arthur, his descendant, be chasing the locket for more than sentiment? The taxi rolled through London's crowded streets, past flower sellers and newsboys, until it stopped before a Georgian building with a discreet brass plaque, "The Argyle Club." Inside, the club was a study in faded opulence. Dark wood paneling gleamed under chandeliers, and the air smelled of cigar smoke and old leather. Miss Marple, posing as a historian researching local families, was greeted by a porter with a face like a well-polished walnut. "Madam, members." "Only I'm afraid," he said, but Raymond's badge and a few murmured words about official inquiries softened his stance. They were ushered to a small reading room, where Miss Marple could consult the archives, while Raymond discreetly questioned the staff. The reading room was a treasure trove of dusty ledgers and yellowed photographs, but Miss Marple's attention was drawn to a portrait above the fireplace, a stern man in Victorian attire, his eyes sharp and his jaw set. The plaque read Sir Reginald Vane, 1870 to 1915, an ancestor of Thomas, perhaps. She made a mental note, then turned to the club's membership records, her gloved fingers flipping through brittle pages. The name Vane appeared sparingly, but a 1900 entry listed Thomas Vane as a temporary guest, admitted under Sir Reginald's sponsorship. Curious, she thought. Why would a clerk be welcomed here, even briefly? Her musings were interrupted by a low voice from the doorway. "Miss Marple, is it?" A man stood there, lean and sharp-featured, his suit impeccably tailored, but his eyes too bright, too watchful. "I'm Arthur Vane. The porter mentioned your interest in my family." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her smile was serene. "Mr. Vane, how kind of you to join me. I'm merely a curious old woman, piecing together St. Mary Mead's history. Your family name came up in connection with the Ashfords." Arthur's smile was tight, like a man balancing on a wire. "The Ashfords? A sad tale. Their estate burned, you know. Nothing left but rumors." He stepped closer, his gaze flicking to her handbag. "You wouldn't happen to have come across any relics of theirs, would you?" She tilted her head, her eyes bright with innocence. "Relics? Oh, you mean old trinkets? I'm afraid I'm more interested in documents than jewelry." Her tone was light, but her mind was racing. He knew about the Locket, how? Had he been watching her since the inn? Their conversation danced like a fencing match, each probing the other's intentions. Arthur spoke of his work, dropping hints about lost heirlooms and family debts. But Miss Marple deflected with questions about the club's history. When he excused himself, claiming a meeting, she noticed his hand linger near a side table, where a photograph of the club's founders lay. As he left, she glimpsed his profile unmistakably. The same as Mr. Clarence's. The matchbook hadn't lied. Raymond returned, his expression grim. "The staff know Vane, but they're tight-lipped. He's been here often, asking about old silver pieces. One waiter let slip he overheard Vane talking about a silver relic worth a fortune." "Sound familiar?" Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Very much so. Our Mr. Vane is Mr. Clarence, I'm certain. And he's after the locket, though I suspect it's not the locket itself he wants, but what it hides." They left the club, Miss Marple clutching a borrowed photograph of Arthur Vane, his face now etched in her memory. The London air was thick with fog as they hailed another taxi, but her thoughts were clear. The Locket's secret, perhaps a code, perhaps a map tied Eleanor Ashford and Thomas Vane to something valuable enough to draw Arthur across decades. As the taxi wound toward Paddington, she felt the weight of his pursuit. He was no mere opportunist. He was a man driven by obsession, and obsession, she knew, made men dangerous. Back in St. Mary Mead that evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the locket gleaming in her hand. The photograph from the club lay on her table, Arthur's eyes staring. Out with a hunger she recognized. She thought of Eleanor and Thomas, their love thwarted by greed and pride, and wondered what they'd hidden. The locket's inscription to E, 1892, seemed to whisper promises kept and broken. Tomorrow she would study the locket's photograph again, its ink marks teasing her like a half-remembered tune dot. As she sipped her tea, a creak from the garden caught her ear. She rose, her movements slow but deliberate, and peered through the lace curtains. The night was dark, but a shadow moved near the rose bushes, a shadow too tall, too purposeful to be a stray cat. Miss Marple's heart beat steadily. She locked the window, her fingers brushing the locket in her pocket. Arthur Vane was closer than she'd thought, but she was ready. In St. Mary Mead, as in life, no secret stayed buried forever not when Jane Marple was listening. Chapter 7. The code unraveled. Miss Jane Marple sat at her small oak table, the morning light filtering through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the room. Her cottage in St. Mary Mead, with its familiar creaks and cozy clutter, felt like a sanctuary, yet today it hung with the quiet tension of a puzzle nearing its solution. The silver locket, now open, lay before her, its tiny photograph and lock of auburn hair bathed in the soft glow of a brass lamp. The photograph's edges, marked with faint ink, had consumed her thoughts since her return from London the previous evening. She adjusted her spectacles, her nimble fingers tracing the marks as she murmured, "A cipher, of course. But what do you hide?" Lucy Islesborough, her young friend and ally in this unfolding mystery, sat across from her, sipping tea, and watching with barely concealed excitement. Lucy's sharp mind and practical nature had already proven invaluable, but it was Miss Marple's knack for seeing patterns in the mundane that drove their progress. The ink marks, barely discernible, formed a series of dots and dashes, irregular, yet deliberate. Miss Marple had seen such things before, codes tucked into love letters or scribbled in the margins of old books, often dismissed as whimsy by the careless. "It's not Morse," Lucy said, leaning forward, her auburn curls catching the light. "I tried that last night after you went to bed. The pattern doesn't fit." Miss Marple nodded, her lips pursed in thought. "No, not Morse. Something older, perhaps. Something personal." She reached for her magnifying glass, a gift from her nephew Raymond, and held it over the photograph. The image showed a young woman, Eleanor Ashford. She was certain standing beside a man with sharp features and a quiet intensity. The ink marks ran along the photograph's border, a series of tiny strokes that seemed to dance in the magnified light. "These aren't random," she said. "They're a message meant for someone who knew how to read it." Lucy set her, teacup down with a soft clink. "But who? Eleanor's lover, Thomas Vane, or someone else?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Thomas, I suspect. A secret shared between them, hidden in plain sight. Lovers often leave such clues, you know, tokens of trust or desperation." She leaned back, her mind drifting to the village gossip she'd pieced together over the years, tales of forbidden romances, whispered in drawing rooms or behind church pews. The Ashford family's fall, the fire that razed their estate in 1893, and Eleanor's disappearance had all been fodder for such whispers. But this locket with its stubborn secrets was no mere trinket. It was a key dot the morning passed in a quiet flurry of activity. Miss Marple sketched the ink marks onto a sheet of notepaper, her hand steady despite the faint ache in her knuckles. Lucy fetched an old book on ciphers from Miss Marple's modest library, a dusty volume she'd acquired years ago after a case involving a coded diary. Together they pored over its pages, testing patterns and discarding false leads. The cipher resisted their efforts, its logic elusive, until Miss Marple paused, her gaze fixed on a single word in the book. Coordinates. Coordinates, she said softly, almost to herself. What if these marks aren't words at all, but a location? Lucy's eyes widened. Like a map reference? But how would that work in 1892? Miss Marple smiled, her mind racing. Not a modern grid, my dear. Something simpler, perhaps, a private system known only to Eleanor and Thomas. Lovers often create their own language, their own landmarks. She tapped the photograph. These marks could point to a place they both knew, a place tied to their secret. Lucy grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and began transcribing the marks. Again, this time grouping them into pairs. Miss Marple watched, her thoughts drifting to the Ashford estate, or what remained of it, a meadow now dotted with wildflowers and the ghosts of grandeur. The estate had been the heart of St. Mary Mead's history, its ruins a silent testament to a family undone by scandal. If the cipher pointed to a location, it was likely there, in the shadow of that lost legacy dot. By noon, they had a breakthrough. The ink marks, when interpreted as a series of numerical pairs, suggested a rudimentary coordinate system, distances measured in paces, perhaps from a fixed point. Miss Marple cross-referenced the numbers with a faded map of the Ashford estate, borrowed from the vicar's collection. The coordinates converged on a spot in the meadow, near a copse of oaks that still stood, gnarled and ancient. We must go there, Miss Marple said, her voice firm despite the flutter of excitement in her chest. This afternoon, before anyone else catches wind of it. Lucy hesitated, glancing at the window. What about that man Arthur Vane? If he's watching, he might follow us. Miss Marple's expression hardened, though her eyes retained their gentle warmth. Let him try. I've dealt with worse than a greedy antique stealer. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and began gathering her things, a sturdy shawl, a small trowel, and a basket to disguise their purpose. We'll take tea in the meadow, my dear. A perfectly innocent outing. The meadow lay a mile from the village, a gentle walk through lanes lined with hedgerows and the hum of bees. Miss Marple, leaning lightly on her stick, moved with a deceptive spryness, her eyes scanning the path for any sign of pursuit. Lucy carried the basket, her practical boots crunching on the gravel. The air was warm, scented with clover and the faint tang of earth, but a tension hung between them, sharpened by the knowledge that Arthur Vane, or Mr. Clarence, as he'd called himself at the Blue Boar Inn, was likely close. They reached the meadow as the sun climbed high, its light gilding the grass and casting long shadows from the oaks. Miss Marple paused, consulting the map and her notes. Here, she said, pointing to a spot near a massive oak, its roots sprawling like ancient fingers. 10 paces north, then 5 east. Lucy counted the paces, her steps careful but eager. Miss Marple followed, her gaze flickering to the surrounding trees, alert for any movement. At the designated spot, they found a flat stone, half buried in the earth, its surface worn but etched with faint letters, E and T forever. The carving was shallow, almost invisible, unless you knew to look for it, a testament to a love that had defied time and tragedy. Lucy knelt, brushing dirt from the stone. "This is it," she whispered, her voice tinged with awe. "They left this here, didn't they?" Miss Marple nodded, her heart quickening. "A marker, yes, but what lies beneath?" She handed Lucy the trowel, her hands too frail for digging, but her mind sharp with anticipation. Lucy began to work, the earth yielding easily under the blade. The soil was soft, as if it had been disturbed long ago and never compacted by time. Within minutes the trowel struck something solid, a metal tin. Rusted but intact, its lid sealed with wax. They exchanged a glance, the weight of the moment settling over them. Lucy pried the lid open, revealing a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, their edges brittle but legible. Miss Marple lifted the topmost letter, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, unmistakably feminine, and signed Eleanor. The words spoke of love, fear, and a desperate plan of fortune hidden to secure a future that never came. "My dearest Thomas," Miss Marple read aloud, her voice steady despite the emotion it carried. "Our love is a crime in their eyes, but I will not let them take it from us. The jewels are safe, hidden where only we two know. If we are parted, seek the oak that guards our vow. It will lead you to our heart's treasure." Lucy's breath caught. Jewels? Could they still be here? Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind racing through possibilities. Perhaps, or perhaps the letters themselves are the treasure proof of a truth someone once buried. She scanned the meadow, her instincts prickling. The air felt heavier now, the silence too complete. "We must hurry, Lucy. Take the tin. We'll read the rest at home." As Lucy gathered the letters, a rustle broke the stillness, a sharp crack of twigs from the copse. Miss Marple's hand tightened on her stick, her posture calm but alert. "Don't look," she murmured. "Keep moving." Back to the path. They walked briskly, the tin concealed in the basket, their steps measured to avoid betraying their urgency. The rustle followed, faint but persistent, like a shadow trailing their heels. Miss Marple's mind churned, piecing together the fragments of the mystery. Arthur Vane, descendant of Thomas, believed the locket led to a fortune. The letters confirmed it, but they also hinted at a deeper betrayal, a family's greed, a lover's exile, a secret worth killing for. Back at the cottage, with the doors locked and the curtains drawn, Miss Marple and Lucy spread the letters on the table. Each one revealed more of Eleanor and Thomas's story, a secret marriage, a stolen inheritance, and a plan to flee with. Jewels spirited away from the Ashford estate. The final letter, written in a hurried scrawl, spoke of Eleanor's fear that her family had discovered their plan. "They watch me always," she wrote. "If I fall, Thomas, you must carry our truth." Miss Marple leaned back, her knitting untouched in her lap. "This is why Arthur wants the locket," she said. "Not just for the jewels, but for what? It proves his ancestors' claim to the Ashford legacy." Lucy frowned, her fingers tracing the ribbon that bound the letters. "But why now, after all these years?" "Because," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but certain, Someone else knows. Someone who's been watching, waiting for the locket to surface. She thought of the shadow outside her window, the disturbed papers at the church hall, the nervous Mr. Clarence at the inn. Arthur Vane was not alone in this hunt, and that made him dangerous, but also vulnerable. The afternoon waned, and Miss Marple devised a plan. "We'll keep the locket and the letters safe," she said, "but we must draw Arthur out. He's desperate, and desperation makes men careless." She instructed Lucy to spread word in the village that they'd found something in the meadow, a half-truth that would reach Arthur's ears. Meanwhile, she wrote to Raymond, urging him to dig deeper into Arthur's connections. If the antiques dealer had allies, she needed to know who they were. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the tin of letters locked in a drawer, and the locket hidden in a biscuit tin, a trick she'd learned from a case involving a stolen cameo. The meadow's discovery had exhilarated her, but the rustle in the bush lingered in her mind. Someone was close, too close, and she would need all her wits to stay one step ahead. She picked up her knitting, the click of needles a steady rhythm against the quiet, and smiled. The game was afoot, and Miss Jane Marple was ready to play. Chapter 8. The Confrontation. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone path leading to Miss Marple's cottage in St. Mary Mead. The roses in her garden, meticulously tended, swayed gently in the breeze, their petals catching the golden light. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of chamomile tea and the faint crackle of a fire in the hearth, though the summer warmth made it more decorative than necessary. Miss Jane Marple sat in her favorite armchair, her knitting needles idle. In her lap, her sharp eyes fixed on the tarnished silver locket resting on the tea-table before her. The locket, now open, revealed its secrets. A tiny photograph of Eleanor Ashford and Thomas Vane, a lock of auburn hair, and the cryptic ink, marks that had led her to the meadow's hidden tin of love letters. Yet the mystery was far from resolved. The shadow of Arthur Vane, the antiques dealer claiming descent from Thomas, loomed larger than ever. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her mind weaving through the threads of the puzzle. Arthur's appearance at the Blue Boar Inn, his cryptic demands, and his connection to a London gentlemen's club all pointed to a man driven by more than nostalgia. The letters from the meadow tin suggested a stolen inheritance, but Arthur's desperation hinted at something deeper, a motive rooted in greed, perhaps, or a need to reclaim a legacy he believed was his birthright. She had no doubt he would come for the locket, and soon. The question was how to meet him on her terms. Lucy Islesborough, her young friend and confidante, sat across from her, stirring her tea absently. Her sharp features were tense, her usual confidence tempered by the unease of their recent discoveries. "Miss Marple," she said, breaking the silence, "do you really think he'll come here? After all, he doesn't know we found the letters." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. "My dear Lucy, men like Arthur Vane are not easily deterred. He has been chasing this locket for years, perhaps his entire life. The moment he suspects we have it, and I assure you he will act. Greed is a predictable motivator, and I've seen its like in St. Mary Mead before. Remember old Mr. Hargreaves and his obsession with that disputed land deed?" Lucy smiled faintly, recalling the tale of the miserly farmer who nearly tore the village apart over a scrap of paper. But Arthur's different. He's not a local, he's slippery. Like he's used to getting what he wants. Precisely, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but firm. Which is why we must be slipperier. Now let us consider our next move. We cannot simply wait for him to knock. The plan began to take shape over the next hour, as the two women sipped their tea and plotted with the precision of a chess game. Miss Marple's approach was simple, yet cunning. Invite Arthur into her world, where she held the advantage. She would offer him tea, engage him in polite conversation, and let his own words betray him. But first she needed to ensure the Locket's safety. The real Locket would be hidden perhaps in the hollowed-out volume of the Vicar of Wakefield, on her bookshelf, a trick she'd used once before during a particularly vexing case involving stolen church funds. A replica, crafted by the village jeweler Mr. Harrow, would serve as bait. Lucy, ever practical, suggested contacting Inspector Raymond West, Miss Marple's nephew, to stand by in case Arthur turned dangerous. Miss Marple agreed, though she preferred to handle the confrontation herself if possible. After all, she said with a wry smile, a little old lady with a teapot can be disarming in ways a policeman cannot. As dusk settled over St. Mary Mead, the cottage glowed with the soft light of oil lamps, casting a cozy warmth that belied the tension within. Miss Marple had sent Lucy to the village post office to dispatch a telegram to Raymond, requesting his discreet presence in St. Mary Mead by morning. Alone now, she arranged the tea tray with deliberate care, a bone china teapot, 2 cups, a plate of shortbread biscuits, and the replica locket placed conspicuously on a lace doily. She adjusted her spectacles, her fingers brushing the reel. Locket, now safely tucked inside the book on the shelf. The stage was set. A sharp knock at the door startled her, though her expression remained unruffled. She smoothed her cardigan, took a deep breath, and called out, "Come in, please." The door creaked open, and there stood Arthur Vane, his tall frame filling the doorway. His tailored coat was slightly rumpled, as if he'd traveled in haste, and his dark eyes darted around the room before settling on Miss Marple. His face, handsome in a weathered sort of way, carried a strained smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth but edged with urgency, "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Mr. Vane," she replied, her tone as warm as the firelight. "Do come in. I was just about to have tea. Would you care to join me?" Arthur hesitated, his gaze flickering to the tea-table and the gleaming replica locket. "That's very kind," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "I won't take much of your time. I've come about a certain item." Miss Marple gestured to the armchair opposite her. "Please sit. The evenings are growing cooler, and a cup of tea does wonders. Chamomile, I find, is particularly soothing." She poured the tea with steady hands, her movements deliberate, as if she were merely hosting a neighbor for gossip. "Now what item might that be?" Arthur sat, his posture rigid, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. "The locket," he said bluntly, abandoning pretense. "The one you've been investigating. It belongs to my family, Miss Marple. I know you have it." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, her expression one of mild surprise. "Oh, my dear Mr. Vane, you do come straight to the point." "I admire that. Yes, I have come across a locket, quite a charming piece. It's there on the table, as you see, but belong to your family? That's a claim I'd be most interested to hear about. Arthur's eyes locked onto the replica locket, its silver surface catching the lamplight. For a moment his composure faltered, a flicker of hunger crossing his face. "It's a Vane heirloom," he said, his voice low. "My great-grandfather, Thomas Vane, gave it to Eleanor Ashford before her family destroyed him. They stole his future, his fortune, everything. That locket is all that's left of his legacy, and it's mine by right." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes never leaving his. "A sad story indeed," she said softly. "I've heard whispers of Eleanor and Thomas, you know. A forbidden love, a family torn apart. But a fortune? That's new to me. Pray, tell me more." Arthur leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. "The Ashfords were wealthy, Miss Marple. Land, jewels, investments. When they disapproved of Thomas, they cut Eleanor off, but not before. She and Thomas hid something valuable. The locket was the key. It's not just a trinket. It points to their secret. I've spent years tracking it down, following every lead, every rumor. And now it's here, in your hands." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of polite curiosity. "And how did you know I had it, Mr. Vane?" "St. Mary Mead is a small village, but news doesn't travel that quickly." Arthur's smile tightened. "I have my sources. The innkeeper at the Blue Boar mentioned a certain Miss Islesborough asking about old jewelry. It wasn't hard to connect the dots." "Clever," Miss Marple said, nodding approvingly. "But I wonder, Mr. Vane, why such urgency? If this locket is merely a family keepsake, why not approach me openly, perhaps with a solicitor? Your methods skulking about the inn, leaving cryptic notes, seem rather dramatic." Arthur's jaw clenched, and for a moment Miss Marple thought he might rise and seize the locket. But he remained seated, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You don't understand, Miss Marple. My family was ruined because of the Ashfords. Thomas was driven out, branded a thief, his name dragged through the mud. That locket is my chance to set things right, to reclaim what they stole. I'm not here to play games." "Nor am I," Miss Marple said, her tone suddenly sharp, though her smile remained. "But I do wonder, Mr. Vane, if your interest is purely sentimental. The locket, you say, points to a fortune. Jewels, perhaps. Hidden away all these years? That's a tempting prize for an antiques dealer, especially one with, shall we say, a reputation for acquiring rare items." Arthur's eyes narrowed, but he didn't deny it. "You've done your homework," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Yes, I deal in antiques. And yes, I know the value of what I'm after. But it's more than money. It's justice. My family deserves this." Miss Marple set her teacup down, her movements deliberate. "Justice is a fine word, Mr. Vane, but it's often a mask for greed. I've seen it before, you know. In St. Mary Mead, we once had a young man, Mr. Carter, who claimed a neighbor's. Land was his by right. He had papers, witnesses, a whole story, but it was all a fabrication, built on half-truths. He wanted the profit, not the principle. I wonder where you stand." Arthur's face flushed, and he rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not here to be lectured, Miss Marple. Give me the locket, and I'll be on my way. No need for this to get unpleasant." Miss Marple remained seated, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "Unpleasant? Oh, my dear Mr. Vane, I'm far. Too old for unpleasantness, but I'm also too old to be bullied. The locket is there, on the table. Take it if you feel you must, but I warn you, taking it won't end your troubles. Secrets have a way of clinging to those who chase them." Arthur hesitated, his eyes darting between Miss Marple and the locket. For a moment the room was silent, save for the ticking of the mantel clock. Then, with a swift motion, he reached for the replica locket, snatching it from the doily. He turned it over in his hands, his fingers trembling as he examined the crest and the inscription. "This is it," he muttered almost to himself. "After all these years." Miss Marple watched him, her expression unreadable. "Are you quite sure, Mr. Vane? It's a fine piece, but appearances can deceive." Arthur's head snapped up, suspicion flaring in his eyes. He pried at the locket, but it wouldn't open. His face darkened. "What is this? Some kind of trick?" "No trick, Miss Marple," said calmly. "Merely a precaution. You see, I've learned a thing or two about human nature in my time. People who want something badly enough often overlook the details. That locket, for instance, it's a lovely copy, made by Mr. Harrow, in the village. The real one is safe, and I assure you it will remain so until I'm certain of your intentions." Arthur's hand tightened around the replica, his knuckles white. "You're playing a dangerous game, old woman," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You don't know what I'm capable of." Miss Marple met his gaze, her eyes steady. "And you, Mr. Vane, don't know what I'm capable of. I've lived in St. Mary Mead all my life, and I've seen men like you come and go. Men who think they can bully their way to what they want. But this is my village, and I protect what's mine. Now sit down and finish your tea. We're not done talking." For a moment Arthur looked as if he might lunge at her, but something in her calm, unflinching gaze stopped him. He sank back into the chair, the replica locket still clutched in his hand. "You're clever," he said, his voice grudging, "but you can't keep it from me forever. I'll find it." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, pouring herself another cup of tea. "But you'll find, Mr. Vane, that secrets have a way of revealing themselves when the time is right, and I intend to ensure that time comes on my terms." The conversation continued for another half-hour, with Miss Marple deftly steering it away from the locket and toward Arthur's past. She asked innocent questions about his life in London, his antiques business, his travels, all while noting the way his answers grew vaguer, his composure more strained. By the time he left, promising to return, she had gleaned enough to confirm her suspicions. Arthur Vane was not just a man seeking justice. He was a man with debts, connections to unsavory figures, and a desperation that bordered on obsession. As the door closed behind him, Miss Marple rose and retrieved the real locket from the vicar of Wakefield. She turned it over in her hands, her mind racing. Arthur's visit had been a gamble, but it had paid off. She now knew his motives, his weaknesses, and his determination. The next step was to draw him out further, to force his hand in a way that would expose him completely. She sat at her writing desk, penning a note to Raymond. "My dear nephew," she wrote, "Mr. Vane has paid me a visit as expected. He is more desperate than I anticipated, and I believe he will act soon. I have a plan of village gathering at the church hall, where the locket's discovery will be announced. It will draw him out, I'm certain. Be ready with your men, but let me handle the rest. Your affectionate Aunt Jane. She sealed the note and placed it on the hall table for Lucy to post in the morning. Then she returned to her armchair, picking up her knitting. The needles clicked rhythmically, a counterpoint to the thoughts spinning in her mind. Arthur Vane thought he was a hunter, but he was about to learn that in St. Mary Mead, Miss Jane Marple was no one's prey. The night deepened, and the village slept, unaware of the drama unfolding in the unassuming cottage. Miss Marple, however, was wide awake, her mind as sharp as ever. The Locket secret was within her grasp, and she would see it through to the end, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 9. The trap springs. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of amber and gold. The church hall, a modest stone building with ivy creeping up its walls, buzzed with anticipation. Villagers milled about, their voices a low hum of curiosity and excitement, drawn by Miss Jane Marple's carefully worded announcement in the parish newsletter, a historical discovery revealed tonight. The promise of unveiling the Locket's secrets had stirred the community, from the butcher's wife to the postmistress, each speculating about the treasure tied to the long-forgotten Ashford family. Inside the hall, Miss Marple moved with quiet purpose, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. Her gray hair was neatly pinned, her cardigan a soft shade of lavender, blending her into the crowd as just another elderly villager. But her mind was a steel trap, calculating every detail of the evening. She had orchestrated this gathering not to flaunt the Locket, but to bait a thief. Arthur Vane, the man who called himself Mr. Clarence, was circling, and she knew he would not resist the chance to claim what he believed was his birthright. Lucy Islesborough, ever the loyal ally, stood near the entrance, her auburn hair catching the light as she greeted guests. Her role was twofold: to charm the villagers into a festive mood and to keep watch for Arthur's arrival. Miss Marple had entrusted her with the replica locket, a clever forgery crafted by a silversmith friend in London. The real locket, with its tiny photograph and lock of auburn hair, lay hidden in a biscuit tin beneath a loose floorboard in Miss Marple's cottage. Safe from prying hands, the hall was adorned with simple decorations, bunting strung across the rafters, tables laden with tea urns, scones, and jam tarts. A wooden podium stood at the front, where Miss Marple would soon speak. Beside it, a glass display case held the replica locket, its tarnished silver gleaming under a single spotlight. The case was locked, but Miss Marple had ensured the key was carelessly left on a nearby table, a temptation too sweet for Arthur to ignore. As the clock struck 6, the hall filled to capacity. Mrs. Price, the florist, whispered to her neighbor about the Ashford family's rumored wealth. Mr. Hayworth, the baker, speculated that the locket might contain a map to buried gold. Miss Marple, overhearing these snippets, allowed herself a small smile. Gossip was a village's lifeblood, and tonight it would serve her purpose, amplifying the lure for Arthur. She took her place near the podium, her hands folded calmly, her eyes scanning the crowd. Lucy caught her gaze and gave a subtle nod. Arthur had not yet appeared, but the air felt charged, as if the very walls knew a storm was brewing. Miss Marple's nephew, Inspector Raymond West, was stationed discreetly at the back, his plainclothes blending with the villagers. 2 local constables, P.C. Harrow and P.C. Wells, lingered near the exits, their presence unnoticed by the chattering crowd, "Ladies and gentlemen," Miss Marple began, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the hum. The room quieted heads. Turning toward her, "Thank you for joining me tonight. As you know, a remarkable discovery has come to light in our village, a silver locket, tied to the Ashford family whose story has long been a whisper in St. Mary Mead." She paused, letting the words settle, her eyes flickering to the display case. "This locket, found by my dear friend Miss Islesborough, holds secrets of love, loss, and perhaps something more. Tonight, I invite you to share in its unveiling." A murmur rippled through the crowd, eyes darting to the glass case. Miss Marple stepped aside, gesturing toward the replica locket, its crest catching the light. She spoke briefly of the Ashford family's history, weaving a tale of their grand estate and tragic fire, carefully avoiding the details of Eleanor and Thomas Vane. Each word was chosen to tantalize, to draw Arthur closer, if he was indeed among them. As she spoke, she noticed a figure slip in through the side door. He was tall, with a sharp jaw and dark eyes that darted nervously. His coat was too fine for a villager, his posture too tense. Arthur Vane. Miss Marple's pulse quickened, though her face remained serene. She continued her speech, describing the locket's inscription, "To E, 1892," and the crest's significance, all while watching Arthur edge toward the display case. Lucy, stationed near the tea table, caught Miss Marple's eye and began circulating, offering scones to distract the crowd. The villagers, engrossed in their chatter and treats, paid little attention to the man lingering near the podium. Arthur's fingers twitched, his gaze fixed on the key left on the table. Miss Marple noted his hesitation, the way his eyes flicked to her, then back to the case. He was weighing his moment. "Before we open the case," Miss Marple announced, "I'd like to invite our vicar, Reverend Clements, to say a few words about the Ashford family's contributions to our church." The vicar, a portly man with a penchant for long-winded sermons, took the podium, giving Miss Marple the chance to step back. She moved toward Lucy, whispering, "He's here." "Keep the crowd engaged." Lucy nodded, her smile bright as she rallied the villagers into a discussion about the locket's possible contents. Could it be a love letter? She asked, prompting gasps and theories. The distraction worked. Arthur seized his chance, slipping the key from the table and moving toward the case that Miss Marple watched, her heart steady. She had anticipated this. The lock on the case was a decoy, designed to stick, forcing Arthur to linger. As he fumbled with the key, Raymond signaled to P.C. Harrow, who began closing in from the left. P.C. Wells mirrored the move from the right. Their steps silent on the wooden floor. Arthur, unaware, jiggled the key, his frustration mounting. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple. The crowd, caught up in the vicar's droning, noticed nothing. Miss Marple, standing near the tea urn, poured herself a cup, her movements deliberate. She caught Raymond's eye and gave a slight nod. "Now." Raymond barked, his voice cutting through the hall. Arthur spun, the key slipping from his fingers. P.C. Harrow grabbed his arm, while P.C. Wells blocked his path to the door. The crowd gasped, heads turning as the scene unfolded. Arthur struggled, his face a mask of panic. "Let me go." "You've no right." "On the contrary," Raymond said, stepping forward, his badge glinting in the light. Mr. Arthur Vane, you're under arrest for attempted theft and suspicion of breaking and entering at the church hall." The villagers erupted in whispers, their eyes wide. Mrs. Price clutched her pearls, muttering about "that shady Londoner." Mr. Hayworth crossed his arms, declaring he'd known something was off about that Clarence fellow. Miss Marple remained calm, sipping her tea. She approached Arthur, who glared at her, his composure unraveling. "You set me up," he hissed. "I merely provided an opportunity," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild. "You chose to take it." Raymond led Arthur to a side room for questioning, the constables keeping the crowd at bay. Miss Marple followed, her steps measured. Inside, Arthur slumped in a chair, his bravado gone. Raymond sat across from him, his notebook open. "Care to explain why you were after the locket?" Raymond asked. Arthur's jaw tightened. "It's mine. My ancestor, Thomas Vane, was robbed of his future by the Ashfords. That locket points to a fortune my birthright." Miss Marple tilted her head. "A fortune, you say? Or a story you've spun to justify your actions?" Arthur's eyes narrowed. "I've spent years tracking it. The Ashfords hid their wealth after the fire, and the locket's the key. Eleanor's letters mention jewels, a cache buried somewhere in St. Mary Mead. And you thought breaking into the church hall and stalking an old lady would get you." "There?" Raymond said, his tone dry. Arthur flushed. "I wasn't stalking, I just needed the locket." Miss Marple leaned forward. "You disturbed parish records, watched my cottage, and followed me to London. You're not a man seeking justice, Mr. Vane, you're a man obsessed." Arthur's shoulders sagged. "I found papers in my grandfather's attic letters from Thomas, ranting about the Ashfords' betrayal. He said the locket held a cipher to the jewels. I've been chasing it for a decade. When I heard about the discovery in St. Mary Mead, I knew it was my chance." Raymond scribbled notes. "And the break-in at the church hall?" "I needed confirmation," Arthur admitted. "I thought the parish records might mention the locket's hiding place. I didn't take anything, just looked." Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her voice remained firm. "You're not the first to be consumed by a family legend, Mr. Vane, but the locket's secrets are not yours to claim." Raymond closed his notebook. "We'll need a full statement. You're coming with us to the station." As the constables led Arthur away, the villagers crowded around Miss Marple, their questions tumbling over each other. She raised a hand, her smile gentle. "All in good time, my dears. For now, let's enjoy the evening." Lucy joined her, whispering, "You were brilliant, Miss Marple." "He never stood a chance," Miss Marple chuckled. "People like Mr. Vane underestimate the quiet ones, Lucy. It's their greatest mistake." The gathering resumed, the villagers' excitement undimmed. Miss Marple slipped the real locket's hiding place into her thoughts, satisfied it remained safe. The trap had sprung, justice was served, and the mystery of the locket was one step closer to resolution. As she nibbled a scone, her mind already turned to the final chapter, the secrets, still buried in the meadow, waiting to be unearthed. Chapter 10. The Secret Laid Bare. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage in St. Mary Mead, bathing the parlor in a soft, warm light. The familiar ticking of the mantel clock mingled with the faint clink of teacups as Miss Marple, Lucy Islesborough, and Inspector Raymond West sat around her small oak table, the air thick with the satisfaction of a mystery unraveled. The tin box, its edges rusted but intact, sat open before them, revealing a stack of yellowed love letters tied with a faded ribbon. Beside it rested the silver locket, its secrets now laid bare, and a small velvet pouch that held the promise of the final piece of Eleanor. Ashford and Thomas Vane's story dot Miss Marple's eyes, sharp as ever behind her spectacles, gleamed with quiet triumph. "Well, my dears," she said, her voice soft but laced with purpose, "we've come to the end of our little adventure, haven't we? But there's still a touch of work to be done before we can truly call it finished." Lucy, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, leaned forward, her curiosity undimmed despite the long days of sleuthing. "Miss Marple, those letters, they're extraordinary. It's as if Eleanor and Thomas are speaking to us from all those years ago. But what do we do with them now? And the jewels?" Raymond, ever the practical policeman, adjusted his tie and nodded. "Aunt Jane, you've outdone yourself this time. Arthur Vane's in custody, the locket's safe, and we've got the letters. But Lucy's right. What's the next step? Those coordinates in the cipher point to something, don't they?" Miss Marple's lips curved into a gentle smile, her fingers absently smoothing the edge of her shawl. "Patience, Raymond. The coordinates, yes, they're the key. But first, let's see what Eleanor and Thomas wished to tell us. Their story deserves to be heard before we go digging in meadows." She reached for the topmost letter, her movements deliberate, as if handling a sacred relic. The paper crackled as she unfolded it, the ink faded but legible, written in Eleanor's elegant hand. Miss Marple adjusted her glasses and began to read aloud, her voice carrying the weight of a century past. "My dearest Thomas, tonight, as the moon hangs low over the meadow, I write with a heart both heavy and hopeful. My family forbids our union, but I care not for their wealth or their pride. You are my heart's home, and I will defy them all to be with you. The jewels, those wretched baubles they value above my happiness, I've taken them, not for greed, but for us, for the life we'll build far from their reach. I've hidden them where only we two know, beneath the stone where we carved our vow. If fate is kind, we'll retrieve them together. If not, let them lie as a testament to our love. Forever yours, Eleanor. The room fell silent, save for the faint rustle of leaves outside. Lucy's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "It's so tragic," she whispered. "They loved each other so fiercely, but it wasn't enough." Raymond cleared his throat, his professional demeanor softening. "She mentions the stone, the one in the meadow, I presume. The coordinates we decoded must point there. But why? Didn't they run away together? What stopped them?" Miss Marple set the letter down, her expression thoughtful. "The next letter may tell us more. Let's see." She selected another, this one in Thomas's bolder, less refined script. "My beloved Eleanor, your courage humbles me. I am but a clerk, unworthy of your love, yet you make me dream of a life I never dared imagine. The jewels are safe, as you instructed, buried beneath our stone. But I fear for you. Your brother's men watch my every move, and I've heard whispers of their plans to send you away. If they part us, know that I will find you, no matter the years or miles. The locket I gave you holds my heart, keep it close. Yours until the stars fade, Thomas. Lucy gasped. Her brother? That must be Edward. Ashford, the head of the family then. He must have been furious about their relationship. Indeed, Miss Marple said, her tone measured. The Ashfords were proud, and a clerk was no match for their heiress. But there's more to this than a simple elopement gone wrong. Eleanor's death in childbirth, mentioned in the parish records, and Thomas's exile, these letters suggest a deeper betrayal. Raymond leaned back, his brow furrowed. You think Edward Ashford did something to ensure they never reunited? Maybe even caused Eleanor's death? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with that familiar spark of insight. I think, Raymond, that families like the Ashfords guarded their wealth jealously. If Eleanor took jewels to fund a new life, her brother would have seen it as theft, not love. But let's read one more before we jump to conclusions. She lifted a third letter, this one shorter, its ink smudged as if written in haste. Thomas, my love, they found us out. Edward knows of the jewels and threatens to lock me away. I've hidden the locket in the trunk at Rutherford Hall, where no one will think to look. If I cannot reach you, find it, and let it guide you to our treasure. I carry our child, and with it, my hope. Forgive me if I fail you. Eleanor Dont. The weight of Eleanor's words settled over the trio like a fog. Lucy clutched the edge of the table, her voice trembling. She was pregnant, and they still tore her from Thomas. How could they be so cruel? Miss Marple's face soft, but her eyes remained sharp. Cruelty often hides behind propriety, Lucy. The Ashfords valued their name above all else. But this letter confirms the locket was hidden deliberately, and the coordinates were meant for Thomas alone. We must visit that meadow. Raymond stood, his energy renewed. I'll arrange for a discreet excavation. We can't have treasure hunters catching wind of this. Aunt Jane, you're sure the coordinates point to the meadow near the old Ashford estate? Quite sure, Miss Marple replied, tapping the decoded cipher, a small slip of paper with numbers scrawled in her neat hand. Latitude and longitude, precise to the meadow where Eleanor and Thomas carved their initials. The stone marker is our guide. Lucy hesitated, her practical side surfacing. But what do we do with the jewels if we find them? They belong to the Vane family, don't they? Arthur Vane claimed they were his birthright. Miss Marple's smile was wry. Arthur Vane is a thief and a bully, my dear. His claim is greed, not justice. The jewels were Eleanor's to give, and she gave them to Thomas for their future. But we'll decide their fate once we see what lies beneath that stone. The next morning, under a sky streaked with wispy clouds, Miss Marple, Lucy, and Raymond stood in the meadow near the ruins of the Ashford estate. The air smelled of damp grass and wildflowers, and the distant hum of St. Mary Mead's daily life felt a world away. The coordinates had led them to a quiet corner of the field, where a flat, moss-covered stone lay half buried in the earth. The faint carving of E and T, forever, was still visible, weathered but enduring. Raymond had brought a small team, 2 trusted constables, and a local historian, Dr. Haydock, who'd been sworn to secrecy. The historian, a wiry man with a penchant for tweed, adjusted his glasses and knelt beside the stone. "Remarkable," he muttered. "This meadow hasn't been touched since the estate burned. If there's something here, it's been waiting a long time." Miss Marple stood back, her umbrella serving as a makeshift cane, her eyes scanning the scene. "Careful now," she said softly. "We're disturbing a love story, not just earth." The constables began to dig, their shovels slicing through the soft soil with rhythmic precision. Lucy hovered nearby, her excitement tempered by reverence. "It feels almost wrong to dig here," she whispered to Miss Marple. "Like we're intruding on their secret." "Nonsense, my dear, miss," Marple replied, her voice kind but firm. "Eleanor wanted this found, or she wouldn't have left the locket and the cipher. We're honoring her wishes." After 20 minutes, one of the constables paused, his shovel striking something solid. "Sir," he called to Raymond, there's something here." The group gathered as the constable brushed away dirt, revealing a small, tarnished metal box, no larger than a cigar case. Its surface was etched with delicate vines, and a sturdy lock held it shut. Raymond lifted it carefully, his gloved hands steady. "This must be it," he said, glancing at Miss Marple. "Shall we open it here?" Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes, but gently. We don't know what state it's in." Dr. Haydock produced a set of tools, and after some careful work, the lock gave way with a soft click. The lid creaked open, revealing a velvet lining, cradling a modest collection of jewels, a sapphire ring, a pair of emerald earrings, a pearl necklace, and a single diamond brooch. They gleamed faintly, their beauty undimmed by decades underground. Lucy gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "They're beautiful, but not a fortune, are they?" "No," Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful. "Not a vast fortune, as Arthur Vane hoped, but enough for Eleanor and Thomas to start anew, had fate been kinder." Raymond frowned, turning the box in his hands. "There's something else here." He lifted a folded piece of parchment, brittle with age. Unfolding it, he revealed a simple sketch, a map of the meadow with an X marking the stone. Beneath it, in Eleanor's hand, were the words, "For our child, should we fail." Dr. Haydock's eyes widened. Their child. The parish records mentioned Eleanor died in childbirth. Did the child survive? Miss Marple's gaze grew distant, as if piecing together a puzzle only she could see. The records were unclear, but Thomas's exile suggests he left alone. If the child lived, they were likely raised by another family, perhaps under a different name. We may never know. Lucy's face lit with determination. We could try to find out. There might be descendants, people who deserve to know this story. Raymond shook his head, ever the realist. "That's a tall order, Lucy. Records from that time are spotty, and names change. But these jewels, they're proof of Eleanor. And Thomas's love. What do we do with them?" Miss Marple clasped her hands, her decision already made. "They belong to St. Mary Mead, to its history. I propose we donate them to the village museum, with a plaque telling Eleanor and Thomas's story, not as a tale of scandal, but of love and sacrifice. The Vane family's name can be restored through truth, not greed." Dr. Haydock nodded enthusiastically. "I can arrange it. The museum's been needing a new exhibit, and this, well, it's a story to capture hearts." Lucy hesitated, her practical nature surfacing again. "But what about Arthur Vane? If he's released, he'll claim they're his." Miss Marple's smile was serene but steely. "Arthur Vane will be occupied with his legal troubles for some time, thanks to Raymond's diligent work. And these jewels were never his to claim. They were Eleanor's gift to Thomas, and now they're our gift to the village." Raymond chuckled, a rare warmth in his voice. "You've got it all figured out, Aunt Jane. I'll ensure the donation is handled properly. No one's going to challenge your plan." That evening, Back at the cottage, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. Lucy and Raymond had left to finalize the museum arrangements, leaving her to her thoughts. The locket rested on the table, its silver surface catching the firelight. She picked it up, running her thumb over the inscription. To E, 1892. "Kept your secret well, Eleanor," she murmured. "But it's free now, and so are you." Outside, the village of St. Mary Mead hummed with its usual quiet charm. The mystery of the locket had stirred its sleepy streets, but now peace settled once more. Miss Marple returned to her knitting, her mind already wandering to the next puzzle that might find its way to her door. For in St. Mary Mead, as she well knew, secrets never stayed buried forever. Chapter 11. The Echoes of Truth. The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead, softening the edges of the village as Miss Jane Marple stepped out of her cottage, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. The air carried the crisp bite of autumn, and the faint scent of wood smoke mingled with the dew-soaked grass. The mystery of Eleanor Ashford and Thomas Vane's locket had been laid to rest, the jewels now safely displayed in the village museum with a polished brass plaque, telling their story. Yet as Miss Marple adjusted her hat and set off toward the village square, a new thread of intrigue tugged at her mind, a whisper that the tale of the locket was not entirely finished. Lucy Islesborough had telephoned the previous evening, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Miss Marple, you won't believe it. Dr. Haydock found something at the museum papers tucked away in an old donation box. A mention an Ashford descendant, someone who might still be alive. Can you meet? Me tomorrow? I've a feeling there's more to uncover." Miss Marple, ever attuned to the undercurrents of human nature, had agreed at once. Now, as he approached the small stone building that housed the St. Mary Mead Museum, she spotted Lucy waiting by the door, her auburn hair bright against the gray stone. Beside her stood Dr. Haydock, clutching a leather portfolio, his eyes alight, with the zeal of a historian on the verge of a discovery. "Good morning, my dear," Miss Marple said, her voice warm but laced with curiosity. "And Dr. Haydock, I see you've brought something intriguing." Dr. Haydock beamed, patting the portfolio. "Miss Marple, you've no idea. These papers, they were misfiled decades ago, hidden in a box of parish donations. They mention a child, Eleanor's child, and a trail that leads beyond St. Mary Mead. I thought you'd want to see them." Lucy's eyes sparkled. "It's like Eleanor's reaching out again, isn't it? After all this time." Miss Marple's lips curved into a gentle smile. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Shall we go inside? A cup of tea and a quiet table will suit us better than standing in the damp." The museum's interior was a cozy labyrinth of glass cases and faded photographs, the air heavy with the scent of old wood and polished brass. They settled at a corner table, where Dr. Haydock opened the portfolio to reveal a collection of brittle documents, letters, a baptismal record, and a single photograph of a solemn-faced infant wrapped in lace. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles and leaned forward, her fingers tracing the edges of the baptismal record. "Margaret Eleanor Vane," she read aloud, her voice soft but deliberate. "Born January 1893, baptized in a parish in Devon. Parents, Eleanor Ashford and Thomas Vane. So the child did survive." Lucy gasped. "Margaret?" Then Eleanor's death and childbirth didn't end their story. But why Devon, and what happened to her? Dr. Haydock pointed to a letter, its ink faded but legible. This was written by a midwife, a Mrs. Clara Benton, to the Devon parish priest. She says Eleanor was sent to a remote cottage to give birth, likely to hide the scandal. Thomas was already exiled, by then shipped off to Canada, from what we know. The midwife took Margaret to a local family, the Graysons, who raised her as their own. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind weaving. Connections. The Ashfords would have wanted no trace of the child in St. Mary Mead, but this letter suggests someone kept track of her. Who wrote to whom, and why was it hidden here? Dr. Haydock hesitated, then pulled out another document, a will, dated 1905, from Edward Ashford, Eleanor's brother. This was tucked in with the rest. Edward left a small trust for a child in Devon, no name given. It's as if he felt some guilt, but couldn't bear to acknowledge Margaret publicly. Lucy frowned. Guilt? After what he did to Eleanor and Thomas? That's cold comfort. Human nature is rarely simple, my dear, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but firm. Edward may have been cruel, but even the cruelest hearts can harbor regret. We must find out what became of Margaret. If she lived, she may have descendants, people who deserve to know their heritage. The trail led them to Devon, to the coastal village of Brighthaven, where the Grayson family had once lived. Miss Marple, Lucy, and Raymond West summoned. From London for what he called Aunt Jane's latest obsession, arrived by train on a blustery afternoon. The village was a patchwork of whitewashed cottages and fishing boats, the sea a restless gray expanse beyond the cliffs. Miss Marple, undeterred by the wind tugging at her hat, led the way to the Brighthaven Parish Hall, where records were kept. The parish clerk, a wiry woman named Mrs. Tuttle, greeted them with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. You're after? Old Grayson records? Not much to find, I'm afraid. They were fisherfolk, mostly, and kept to themselves. But I'll fetch what we have. As Mrs. Tuttle rummaged through a dusty filing cabinet, Miss Marple's eyes wandered to a framed photograph. On the wall, a group of villages from the 1920s, standing proudly by a new lifeboat. One face, a young woman with striking dark eyes, caught her attention. Mrs. Tuttle, she said, her voice deceptively casual. Who is that young lady in the photograph? Mrs. Tuttle glanced up. Oh, that's Maggie Grayson. Bless her. She was a school teacher here, much loved. Passed away in the 60s, but her daughter still lives in the village. Clara Penrose runs the bookshop on High Street. Lucy's eyes widened. Maggie, as in Margaret? Could she be Margaret Vane? Miss Marple's smile was serene. Let's not jump to conclusions, but it's a promising thread. Mrs. Tuttle, may we see the Grayson family records, particularly anything about Maggie? The records confirmed that Maggie Grayson, born 1893, was adopted by the Graysons as an infant. No mention of Eleanor or Thomas, but a note in the margin, in the same midwife's hand, read, Child of E.A., to be protected. Miss Marple's fingers lingered on the page, her mind racing. We must visit Clara Penrose, she said. She may hold the final piece of this puzzle. The Brighthaven bookshop was a charming clutter of shelves and sea-salted air, its windows adorned with nautical knots and faded maps. Clara Penrose, a woman in her late 60s with silver-streaked hair and a warm smile, welcomed them with a tray of scones and tea. Visitors from St. Mary Mead, that's a journey. "What brings you here?" Miss Marple, ever tactful, began with pleasantries about the bookshop, before steering the conversation to Maggie Grayson. "We're researching a family connected to St. Mary Mead," she said, her voice gentle. "Your mother, Maggie, was adopted by the Graysons, wasn't she? Do you know anything about her birth parents?" Clara's smile faltered, her hands pausing over the teapot. "Mother never spoke much about it. She said she was a foundling, left with the Graysons by a kind woman. But she had a locket, not silver, but gold, with a tiny engraving of a crest. She always said it was her only link to her past." Lucy's breath caught. "A crest? Like the Ashford crest?" Clara frowned, then rose to fetch a small wooden box from a shelf. "See for yourself." She opened it to reveal a delicate gold locket, its surface etched with the same crest Miss Marple had seen on Eleanor's silver locket. Inside was a miniature portrait of a young woman, Eleanor, unmistakably, her dark eyes gazing out with quiet defiance. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she kept her composure. "This is remarkable, Mrs. Penrose. May I ask what your mother told you about this locket?" Clara's eyes grew distant. "She said it came with a letter, but it was lost years ago. The letter called her Margaret, beloved of Eleanor. She thought Eleanor was her mother, but she never knew more. The Graysons were good to her, but they kept her origin secret, even from her." Raymond, who had been quiet, leaned forward. "Mrs. Penrose, we believe your mother was Margaret Vane, daughter of Eleanor Ashford and Thomas Vane. They were separated by tragedy, but their story has come to light through a locket we found in St. Mary Mead. The jewels they hid are now in our village museum, with their story told." Clara's hand flew to her mouth, tears welling. "My mother." "And Ashford? And those jewels, are they hers?" Miss Marple's voice was kind but firm. "They were your mother's inheritance, in a way, but they belong to the village now, to honor Eleanor and Thomas. But your mother's story, your story, deserves to be known. Would you come to St. Mary Mead? The museum would benefit from your voice, and we'd ensure your mother's name is added to the plaque." Clara hesitated, then nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. "I'd like that. Mother would have wanted her story told, not hidden." The whodunit return to St. Mary Mead was a quiet triumph. Clara accompanied them, bringing her mother's locket and a handful of Maggie's old journals, filled with poetic musings about her unknown origins. At the museum, Dr. Haydock arranged a small ceremony to update the exhibit. The brass plaque was replaced with one that read, "In memory of Eleanor Ashford and Thomas Vane, whose love endured beyond tragedy. Their daughter, Margaret Vane Grayson, carried their legacy. Donated by the Village of St. Mary Mead and Clara Penrose, 2025. As the crowd, villagers, historians, and a few curious reporters gathered, Miss Marple stood to the side, her eyes on Clara as she spoke of her mother's kindness and quiet strength. Lucy squeezed Miss Marple's hand, whispering, "You did this, Miss Marple. You brought them all together." "Nonsense, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her voice soft. "I merely followed the threads. Eleanor and Thomas wove the tapestry." That evening, as the village settled into its familiar rhythm, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting needles clicking once more. The locket, the jewels, and now Margaret's story had found their place. But as she glanced at the window, where the moon hung low over the meadow, she wondered what other secrets St. Mary Mead might yet whisper. For in a village like hers, the past was never truly silent.